Good morning, everybody, and also good morning to the colleagues that are following us online. So this is a scientific colloquium of EFSA on indirect effect of pesticide. I'm Domenica Auteri, I'm working in EFSA, and you might recognize several other EFSA colleagues by this orange liner in the room. Before starting, I would like to introduce two guests that give us the welcome messages. First is Klaus Berend, is the Director of Food Safety, Sustainability and Innovation of DG Santé. And the second is Carlos Das Nevas, our EFSA chief scientist. So I give them immediately the floor to both of them for their welcome. Klaus, you are first.
Thank you, Domenica, for the introduction, and good morning to everybody. First, I would like to thank EFSA for organizing this colloquium, gathering experts from different backgrounds to exchange ideas and knowledge about the important topic of the assessment of potential risks from indirect effects of pesticides on biodiversity. I regret very much that I cannot be with you in Brussels today to make this introduction in person, but unfortunately my agenda required me to be in Kraków in Poland for the ECHA Management Board meeting, so I have to do this remotely, and I actually hope that you can hear me well. Now, allow me to take you a bit back in time to 2022, 2023, when the peer review process for the scientific risk assessment in the context of the procedure for the renewal of the approval of glyphosate was ongoing. During that process, the possible impacts of glyphosate on human health were intensely debated, and actually they are still debated today, but also the potential impacts on the environment, in particular the possible indirect impacts via trophic interaction came up as an issue. As you know, the EU has a very strict legislative framework in relation to pesticides that requires that no active substance can be used without first being approved at EU level, followed by subsequent authorizations of each product containing the substance in the member states. Approvals are only granted if the risk assessment shows that it can be expected that at least one representative use of at least one product is safe in at least one member state. And this assessment was also done for glyphosate. While the standard for human and animal health is no harmful impacts for the environment, it must be shown that there are no unacceptable impacts, which implicitly means that some impacts are tolerable, and it is for the risk managers to decide on acceptability. Now, when looking again at the situation for glyphosate at the time of its assessment, no unacceptable direct impacts were identified when appropriate risk mitigation measures are considered, and they were later included in the approval conditions as necessary. However, the experts and EFSA conducting the peer review of the risk assessment also found that in the absence of EU-agreed methods and guidance, it was not possible to exclude fully potential indirect impacts via trophic interactions, and EFSA reflected that in its conclusion. It must be noted also that this was the first time that such indirect impacts via trophic interactions were explicitly examined in EFSA conclusions, and the experts noted that such impacts are complex and multifactorial. They are also likely to be similar for any broad spectrum herbicide, so not necessarily specific to glyphosate, because all of them in the end have the objective to remove weeds as much as possible, and they are the feed source for other organisms. So clearly, this is a topic that is more general than just glyphosate. In the decision-making process that led then to the adoption of the regulation renewing the approval of glyphosate, the Commission committed in the Standing Committee to mandate EFSA to develop relevant guidance in order to address this new issue, not only for glyphosate, but in a general way. And this brings me to the subject of the colloquium today. Last year, the Commission sent two separate mandates to EFSA. One, to review certain sections of the current terrestrial guidance document for ecotoxicity, in particular non-target arthropods and in-soil organisms. And the second one, to develop a risk assessment methodology to assess the potential indirect impacts on biodiversity via trophic interactions under agro-environmental conditions. Carlos, who will speak after me, will explain in further detail the context of these mandates. But allow me to already highlight a few points in these mandates which are important for the Commission. A risk assessment needs to strike the right balance. If it is too stringent or impractical, product approvals, or in this case, active substance approvals, can be delayed. Or worse, companies decide not to even apply to bring new substances to the EU, and this would hamper innovation and ultimately also potentially negatively impact competitiveness of the EU farming sector. On the other hand, if guidance is too lenient or not up to date in terms of scientific knowledge, safety could be compromised. So the guidance that EFSA is tasked to develop needs to be ambitious, considering up-to-date scientific research and knowledge, but it also needs to be realistic, meaning more precisely, it must be implementable in real-world conditions and support efficient and effective risk assessments. Otherwise, the overall credibility of the regulatory process is put into question. So developing guidance that lives up to these expectations requires involvement of all stakeholders, including also in particular the member states, as ultimately they will also be the ones who have to use such guidance in the context of product authorizations. EFSA has ensured this involvement as described in the outline for these mandates that are available online on ECHA's website. And the process includes several information gathering and consultation steps, one of them being the colloquium held today. With this, I wish you interesting and productive discussions today on this very important topic. You all, and in particular EFSA colleagues, have a daunting task ahead of them for developing these guidance documents. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to EFSA's chief scientist, Carlos Gonzalo das Neves, for his introductory remarks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to Klaus, and a very good morning to everyone in the room. First of all, allow me also to convene the messages of greetings from our Executive Director, Dr. Bernard Hull, who could not make it to Brussels. And thanks to all of you who made it here, but I understand there's 2 or 3 times more people joining online, so thanks to everyone, wherever you are. Truly excited to kick off this event as together with Klaus Behren, Director at DG Santé, on what he has already framed to be essential discussions forwards. He already gave me some tasks. I'm not sure I'll cover them all because the mandates are well known to a lot of people. But anyway, I think it's a privilege, at least for me, to be here among people that I know share a common passion for improving ecosystems, for improving our environment, and for advancing food safety and health. From the work that is happening in EU institutions, to the national authorities, to the research in academia, the hands-on expertise and engagement of our NGOs, the innovation of the private sector, and of course the commitment of the many experts of EFSA and my many colleagues. They are here throughout the room. You will notice they're all orange, flagging orange today. Everyone plays their part, and you have all answered the call. So the first word actually is to thank you. We may not always have the same views, we may differ how we approach things, but we share a common understanding. The health of the people and the health of our planets they are deeply interconnected. This shared conviction brings us, of course, directly to the famous One Health concept and approach. But it's important to emphasize that when we talk of the safety of our food and the protection of our environments, we are, in fact, talking of this holistic approach, this holistic well-being of life on Earth. But it needs collaboration and it needs cooperation. As we know, every day across Europe, chemicals play an undeniable role in modern lives. From the fields that feed us to the medicines we use to heal our animals, they protect our crops, they treat our livestock, they underpin countless industrial processes. But colleagues, with a lot of utility comes a lot of responsibility. And we know that these substances can pose risks, particularly to the very ecosystems that sustain all this production, all this life. That's why a good environmental risk assessment before these chemicals can reach out the markets is a key. The goal should be straightforward and rather non-negotiable. We need to ensure that these chemicals do not cause unacceptable harm, and to identify and characterize every possible adverse effect on non-target organisms, on delicate ecosystems, on this precious biodiversity that is the foundation of life. But let's also be straightforward, even with our best intentions, the reality is that current frameworks have a few blind spots. And these indirect effects, the effects through the food chain, the subtle shifts in the ecosystems, the changes mediated by trophic interactions, these remain insufficiently explored and they wrote me should, I'm going to upgrade, must be better addressed. It's not lack of will, but it's really the absence of a fully developed regulatory framework, as my colleague Klaus Behrendt already mentioned. And this is the gap, the critical gap that brings us together here today. Last year, the European Commission tasked EFSA with the crucial mission to update the guidance on terrestrial ecotoxicology, and I'm going to say perhaps significantly also to develop this pioneering framework for assessing these very indirect effects on biodiversity. Methodologies is the goal that need to be, as already heard today, practical, proportionate, and based on the latest scientific knowledge. They need to be scientifically robust, transparent, but they really need to provide solutions, and most important, they need to be inclusive. And we know that an important component of this work will be to involve supporting our risk managers in defining and operationalizing the specific protection goals. And we are aware that by doing so, this updated guidance and framework will not only enhance the scientific robustness, but also improve, support the transparency and the consistency of our risk assessments throughout Europe. And when it comes to SPGs, I think we all share the feeling that they are long awaited, long needed, and long overdue. I want to say that, of course, for this is key for us, and we are really investing in EFSA on this. Initiatives that are with research supporting this mandate are well known to most of you. At home, we host PERA, and I see Domenica here, so she can provide any details for those. But we are also collaborating broadly. We have PARC, Siberac, Polinera, Wildposh, just a few of this fostering collaboration to share understanding, to co-develop tools, to integrate the best science available. We don't do this just because we want to avoid duplication, but by the way, we need to avoid duplication, especially with member states, but to ensure that the regulatory science evolves as close to science discovery as possible. This gap can never be too big. But here is the catch, colleagues. We can't do this in a vacuum. This scientific colloquium is taking place now, at the early stages of the process. It's not that we want to share with you all the answers. It's exactly because we recognize we don't have them yet. And it's here that your input, your opinions, your invaluable insights, your critics, your concerns, they will help co-shape the direction of our work from the onset. These are welcomed, but most important, these are essential. And allow me to perhaps be a little aspirational. We've heard about the EFSA guidance, It should really not be an EFSA guidance. It should really be an EU guidance, an European guidance, where you can all find yourselves, whether you are a member state, whether you're an NGO, whether you're an industry. It should be a collective and hopefully integrative work. More than 20 years ago, EFSA was built in the spirit of an EU teamwork, a collaboration between a small little EU agency in beautiful Parma and all the member states and the stakeholders that across Europe are responsible, are knowledgeable, but are also passionate for food safety and the protection of the consumers, animals, plants, and the ecosystems we share. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, we must really embrace a new collaborative way of doing business as usual. This colloquium, this interaction is our attempt, your attempt, I hope, to change the way we do this business, this work. So I challenge you to engage today with open minds and this shared EU team spirit. Let's embrace the complexity, let's challenge our assumptions, and let's collaboratively forge a path together. I truly believe that with so much passion in the room, mixed with so much expertise and commitment to science, if we get this through, we're not just solving the problems that Klaus highlighted, we are really building a safer and healthier future for the generations to come. The European Commission, they've asked this of us. Our fellow citizens, they expect this of us. But ladies and gentlemen, our planet, it demands this of us. Good discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. It works. Thank you, Carlos. So now we will have 3 speakers that will bring us into the topic and also preparing us for the discussion this afternoon where we have breakout groups. This will be explained later by NetPlus, how it works, how they will work. And I think we can introduce the first speaker, Clémentine Fritz from University of French Comté. Please, you can take place here. And Clémentine will introduce us the role of trophic interaction in pesticide assessment. So thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks. So my talk today deals with the role of trophic interactions in the indirect effects of pesticides. Next slide. Doesn't work. Thanks. So, as you know, as we all know, plant protection products can induce some undesired effects, and this because of direct effects on the organisms that are driven by direct exposure to the compounds and the toxicity of the compounds, but also because of indirect effects, also referred to as secondary effects, that are mediated through direct impacts on other species or on the physical environment. And so this indirect effects depend on ecological mechanisms and species interactions. On this graph, there is an example for terrestrial vertebrates showing why and the proportion of indirect effects, why they partly underlie undesired effects of pesticides. In yellow and orange, you see that the proportion of this mechanism of impact represent a high proportion in adverse effects. There are various processes involved. I will come back later to these different processes, but importantly, trophic interactions are involved in most of the ecological processes that are related to indirect effects. In fact, consumer resource interactions underlie the functioning of food webs. And this functioning allows the cycling of nutrients in ecosystems with the transfer of matter and energy from one trophic level to another. But this functioning also supports the transfer of trophically transmitted chemicals and parasites. This generates reciprocal effects on the population dynamics. Because of resource limitation, there is a bottom-up control from primary producer and consumer to top predators on the dynamics of top predators. And because of consumption and predation, predators regulate the dynamics of consumers and of primary producers. This functioning also generates interactions for acquisition of food resources with interdependent relationship between organisms, such as symbiosis, facilitation, or competition. But this is a simplified presentation of a food web. In real world, a food web is more like this example of a marine trophic network where you can see the numerous links and interactions between trophic levels and within trophic levels. Trophic interactions shape exposure and bioaccumulation of food webs because they determine dietary exposure, so the ingestion of food containing pesticides. Because of direct exposure, when organisms consume treated seeds or treated vegetation, but also secondary poisoning when organisms consume a prey targeted by pesticides that have accumulated pesticides. And trophic interactions also shape the transfer in food webs of pesticides and in some cases biomagnification of pesticides because of a trophic enrichment of the compounds and a progressive rise with trophic level, and so an increase of the concentration of the compounds in tissues of organisms along the food web. So coming back to the processes related to indirect effects of pesticide, the first one is the interaction with pathogens or parasites and their vectors. The chemicals may induce direct toxic effects because of immunotoxicity, reducing resistance to parasitic or infection diseases. But they can also induce modification of the environment or cause effects on other organisms, and then favor the proliferation or survival of pathogens or parasites. For instance, it has been shown for the herbicide atrazine that it decreased the phytoplankton abundance and therefore increased the nutrient availability and water clarity, which allow the development of algae. This development of algae allowed an increase in abundance and richness of gastropods, which are the intermediate hosts of the parasites, the trematodes. And this triggered an increase in the abundance of trematodes in the environment that, together with a decrease of immunity in frogs, finally increased infections in the amphibian species. Another important indirect effect is the alteration of habitat. Herbicides and to a lesser extent fungicides may have negative effects on primary producers, thus decreasing the cover of vegetation, decreasing hay, decreasing structural diversity, decreasing the abundance of keystone foundation species, and less buffering of ground temperature. It has been shown for some herbicides in Mediterranean areas that, for instance, they provoke a decline of seagrass. This direct effect on habitat cause indirect effect for other organisms, with a decrease of habitat, shelter, refuge, a decrease in support structures for nesting or wintering, and degraded environmental conditions. For glyphosate or hexacinon, the use of such herbicides can induce a decrease in occurrence or reproduction in birds or rodents, and also fungicides could increase the risk to amphibian or reptiles. So when used in agricultural ecosystems, Pesticides can cause direct effect, both in-field and off-field, because of the various processes of transport in the environment, so provoke effect within the landscape mosaic and between ecosystems. So pesticides may have undesired effects on diversity, abundance or activity in organisms of the different trophic levels within the food chain. So fungicides and herbicides have negative effects on primary producer and decomposer that alter gas exchange, primary production, nutrient and organic matter cycling, and provoke a loss in dispersal of propagules and a decrease in the dissipation of contaminants. But these effects then propagate to first and secondary consumer through a decrease in food resources, alteration of foraging habitat, and a decrease of host plant. And these effects again propagate through higher trophic levels, together with the impact of insecticides and fungicides on primary and secondary consumer because of the lack of food resources. This is the bottom-up cascade that have increasingly been documented. For instance, in this study on a bird, partridges, the increased use of pesticides in the 50s trigger a decrease in the availability of insects that cause food shortage in chicks of partridges and increased mortality of the chicks. And this drops in chick survival and in a decline of the population of the birds. Also, similarly, such process has been shown in aquatic system, in Japan, for instance, where the increased use of neonicotinoid insecticides caused a decline in zooplankton biomass and then a decline in fish population feeding on this phytoplankton. Importantly, trophic interactions also support cross-ecosystem linkages. Aquatic invertebrates represent valuable source of biomass, a source of high nutritional quality for a lot of terrestrial taxa. And it has been shown that pesticides, currently used pesticides, can decrease the abundance and biomass of aquatic invertebrates, modify the community composition, and provoke a delay in the timing of the peak of emergence. This decreases the availability of prey from aquatic systems and so disrupts both aquatic and terrestrial food webs, provoking a decline in the populations of insectivores. But parallelly, there is also a transfer of pesticides from aquatic to terrestrial food webs. For instance, Cross and colleagues showed along a gradient of insecticide concentration in water an increase of 50% in the pesticide flux to terrestrial systems, but a decrease of 40% in the biomass which emerged from the system. The lack of food resource is thought as a key process in the current agricultural biodiversity decline. But beside bottom-up cascade, there is also the process of top-down cascade. And effects on predators and consumer decrease predation, herbivory, biological regulation, decrease pollination, dispersal of propagules, but increase the risk of pathogen and parasite transmission. And there are also horizontal effects with a decrease of competition, a decrease of facilitation, and a loss of symbionts. Let's take an example. An herbicide would have negative direct effect on primary producers, and this causes a decrease in primary production and so food supply for consumer and their predators that would decrease. But parallelly, tolerant primary producer would be released from competition, and this can increase the primary production for tolerant species. And such a compensatory effect increase the consumer biomass, but only for the one able to exploit tolerant species. In the case of an insecticide, direct effect on primary consumer would decrease herbivory, and so tolerant consumer would be released from competition. But tolerant primary producer would increase, and such effects on competition and primary production will differently impact the biomass of primary consumer depending on their tolerance or sensitivity. Another important pathway is related to behavior. Chemicals can alter behavior, predatory behavior, anti-predatory behavior, and risk-taking, especially that impact competition, predations, and pathogens or vectors. So the direct effects of behavior of a predator can cause indirect effect on prey-predator interactions, and so population dynamics of consumer, producers, or competitors because of top-down control and competition, as we have explained. And then feedback loops of bottom-up control and competition will further influence the dynamics. Several PPPs that are neurotoxic or that cause endocrine disruption have been shown to increase vulnerability to predation, decrease predation ability, decrease food consumption in consumers and predators, or cause maladapted food consumption. This ultimately decrease the survival and fitness of individuals and alter food web structure and ecological functioning. To conclude, trophic interactions are a cornerstone in the undesired effects of pesticides because they shape dietary exposure and bioaccumulation and transfer in food webs. They also underlie trophic cascades, so the propagation of effects within communities at the landscape scale, and the trans-ecosystem spread of effects. Eventually, this impacts the ecological functioning and ecosystem services. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We will have a Q&A after the free speeches, so now I will invite Lorraine Motti for the second speech, and Lorraine will tackle the topic from another angle, so evaluating the effect on ecosystem services and ecological function.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Clementine, for a wonderful overview of the indirect effects that plant protection products or pesticides may cause. And I'm going to build on that presentation, but I've been asked to look through the lens of ecosystem services and ecological functions. So agroecosystems may support many ecosystem services, a number of which are indicated on this slide. They include provisioning services, shown in green, regulation and maintenance services, shown in brown, and cultural services, shown in orange. The key thing to know is not all ecosystem services need direct use. For example, the indirect non-use value of biodiversity, as represented through existence or bequest values, are important ecosystem services. These ecosystem services are provided by multiple taxonomic groups, each of which may contribute to different ecosystem services. So if we consider major groups within terrestrial systems, oops, it's a little bit fast. Microbes can contribute to waste mediation, soil quality and pest control. Plants to waste mediation, erosion control, water regulation, soil quality and the production of food, fibre and energy. Invertebrates in soil to water regulation, soil quality and pest and disease control. And above ground invertebrates, seems to be a little sticky. There we go. Can also contribute to pollination and seed dispersal, whereas mammals and birds, they'll come up eventually, I guess, can contribute to energy production, pest and disease control, pollination and seed dispersal, and all of them can potentially contribute to genetic resources and cultural ecosystem services. Which way should I point this for it to work? For provisioning and many cultural ecosystem services, and what's important is the identity and abundance of particular species. However, for many other ecosystem services, including maintenance and regulatory services, it's not what the species are that's important, it's what they do. So, for example, if you take experimental interactions such as bird watching, it's really important to know what specific species of birds are present, and the rarer the better. However, if you're interested in erosion control, what's important is not which plants are present per se, but what functional traits those plants have that enable those plants to stabilise soil. Sorry about this. It would be better if I just had a computer with a button. Can we go back a bit? Back a slide? Thank you. So the relationship between the properties of organisms and the functions and services they provide has been visualised in cascade models, such as the one shown here. In this model, the ability of organisms to detoxify, degrade or sequester chemicals is underpinning their capacity to reduce contaminant concentrations. This function occurs whether the people benefit from it or not. But in order for this to be an ecosystem service of waste mitigation, there must be beneficiaries that value the clean soil and water that are a consequence of the removal of contaminants by the action of those organisms. All ecosystems produce functions, but not all functions translate into services. So we need to think about what indirect effects there may be on these functions and then the potential consequences for services. As Clementine just identified, one of the main ways in which pesticides may cause indirect effects is through trophic interactions, and she very clearly explained how these may occur through trophic cascades, how they may occur through secondary poisoning, and how they may occur through exploitative competition. However, also important is apparent competition. And an example of apparent competition is where you have a predator feeding on two prey species that differ in their sensitivity. In the presence of a pesticide, for example, then the sensitive prey population abundance will decrease, and this will have bottom-up effects on the predator. But if the predator then switches prey to feed more on the tolerant species and increase predation pressure on that species, its population will also reduce due to apparent competition. Indirect effects may also occur through interactions between services. So, for example, if we take the ecosystem service of the production of wild food, whether that's game birds or fruit, that's dependent on a whole range of other ecosystem services, including pest and disease control, pollination, soil quality, and seed dispersal. Any direct effects on those intermediate ecosystem services will have indirect effects on the final ecosystem service of food production. And the final ecosystem service of food production may also have indirect effects on cultural services, for example, nature observation or local traditions around the harvesting and processing of wild foods. The third example is how interactions between systems may result in direct effects. And again, Clementine mentioned this in her presentation. And the example I want to highlight here is the way that in-stream pollution may have consequences for pest control by terrestrial invertebrates. And the example is spiders. So in-stream pollution can reduce the abundance of insect nymphs, which reduces the abundance of emerged insects, which are important prey for spiders. But spiders also feed on terrestrial invertebrates, including plant pests. So the effect of in-stream pollution on pest control depends on how spiders interact with plant pests in the presence of reduced emerged insects. If that's through top-down control, then pest control will actually decrease. If it's through apparent competition, pest control will increase. We explored this in a study where we did an extensive survey of aquatic and terrestrial communities along a number of river systems. We compared upstream and downstream of pollution inputs. And what we found was that in-stream pollution did indeed cause a significant reduction in the abundance of emerged insects downstream. That was associated with a reduction in spiders at downstream locations, so you got that indirect bottom-up effect. However, that indirect effect on spiders did not propagate to effects on the abundance of the plant pests. So we've seen that these trophic interactions are important in terms of thinking about the propagation of effects through food webs and the effect that may have on functions and services. And we can think about conceptualising that by, in a simplified way, thinking of feeding guilds and thinking of how different groups of organisms are distributed across those feeding guilds. And that's shown by the different coloured squares. And of course, plant protection products will target different parts of food webs, again, as Clementine highlighted. Fungicides will target pathogens, for example, insecticides, plant pests, herbicides, weeds. But how may those direct effects propagate through food webs and influence function and services? So the application of herbicides may interfere with insect-plant interactions, which will have consequences for pollinators and the ecosystem service of pollination. Insecticides may have bottom-up effects on carnivores and pathogens, which are important in pest control, but they may also have direct effects on insect predators, such as ladybirds, and parasitoids, such as parasitic wasps, again reducing pest control. Reductions in insects may have bottom-up effects on game birds, reducing food production, and those carnivores may then switch their prey from insect-dominated diets to other non-insect components, which may be detritivores and therefore have consequences on soil quality. So you can see a potential network of effects here, and what's important in understanding this network is to consider those interactions between different feeding guilds and between different taxonomic groups. So how may we do that? Well, currently when we do a terrestrial risk assessment, it's quite bitty. We do different assessments on different groups of organisms. Non-target terrestrial plants, in-soil organisms, non-target arthropods, birds and mammals. But as we've seen in this presentation and in Clementine's presentation, there are important trophic interactions between those various groups, and also between terrestrial and aquatic systems. So to really understand the implications of pesticide exposure on these organisms and the functions and services they provide, we need to be thinking about these interactions as well as the effects on individual groups themselves. And within recent scientific opinions, such as on non-target plants, on arthropods and in-soil organisms, we've begun to think about these indirect effects through food web support. But how may we evaluate that? So this is just a few ideas to help you think about things for this afternoon. Well, we should take a stepwise approach. So the first way that we can try and evaluate effects on ecosystem service functions, ecosystem service and the functions underpinning them, is by evaluating direct effects. If we have no direct effects on service provider, food resources and predators, we'll have no indirect effects through food trophic cascades or through secondary poisoning or through competition. However, if some direct effects are tolerable, then what we're really interested in is the extent to which those direct effects may propagate through to changes in the abundance and function of vulnerable service providers. And if some effects on vulnerable service providers are tolerable in field, then what we're really interested in is the extent to which those overspill into off-field areas. And the way we can evaluate those is through laboratory studies for direct effects, empirical and modelling studies for thinking about propagation to populations, abundance and function, and spatial population landscape models to think about overspill into off-field areas. So just to give a slight taster of the sorts of models that one could use, individual and agent-based models are really useful for extrapolating from effects on individuals through to populations and the ecosystem services they provide. This example is for in-stream, which allows you to model the direct effects of contaminants on life history variables, the indirect effects of prey density on the performance of individual fish, and the consequences that has for the angling stock, which underpins a recreational fishery, and that can be done at a reach scale or a catchment scale. Bioenergetic food web models are potentially useful for exploring the interactions between those trophic links. We can vary the target depending on toxic mode of action or on relative sensitivity of different components, and we can vary food web properties. So we can vary connectance, looking at whether we've got specialists and generalists, and looking at the richness of the food web. And then we can see the consequence of those differences on biomass, species persistence and stability. And then finally, we can use landscape population models to look at overspill. And this is an example using two ALMAS models, one for a beetle and one for a spider, looking at the overspill of effects in oilseed rape fields on the delivery of pest control services within the oilseed rape field and off crop in 4 different landscapes shown by different colours. And what the take-home message here is there may be overspill. That overspill depends on the species that's affected, and it depends on the landscape properties, including the extent of the area that's sprayed. So in terms of take-home messages, the indirect effects on ecological functions and associated ecosystem services may arise via interactions between species, between services, and between systems. Direct effects of plant protection products on target and non-target species can propagate through food webs and will potentially have consequences for functions and services. Indirect effects on functions and services will be minimised by restricting direct effects on food and predators of vulnerable service providers, by restricting indirect effects on vulnerable service provider abundance and function, and by restricting spillover of in-field effects on service provision to off-field areas. And hopefully what this presentation and the presentation of Clementine has demonstrated is if we really want to understand indirect effects of pesticides on species, on their functions and on the services they provide, we need to integrate across risk assessment elements, and we need to consider metapopulation dynamics within a landscape context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now is Jens Dauber from Thunen Institute of Biodiversity, and will explain us how to mitigate or possible strategies to mitigate the risk of indirect effects. Thank you.
Yeah, hello, and thanks a lot to Clementine and Lorraine for paving nicely the way now to come to mitigating effects, in particular at the landscape level. So if we're talking about mitigation, we have to remind ourselves that we are talking about many different types of fields located in many different types of landscapes that we're having in Europe. Usually what we think is that, well, we have or had once upon a time a lot of those landscapes like the ones here on the left, and they were rich in biodiversity, rich in structure, but actually very low in productivity. We still have those landscapes in Europe, but many of them developed to those landscapes shown here on the right, which are more productive, which are machine ready, and of course, which look like that because we have pesticides we can use so that we can shape the landscape in this way. Which means, from a nature conservation perspective, we lose the resources for biodiversity, as it was shown in the previous presentations, and at the same time we create habitat, a lot of habitat for pest species, which again makes it necessary to apply plant protection products. We do this because obviously the revenue is quite good with this system, not necessarily the yield. There are different aspects on that, but it's working in a way. But as Lorraine pointed out, we have a problem probably with ecosystem services. So what I call the agroecological potential of those landscapes. So it's not only an issue for nature conservation, but it's also an issue for agriculture. In particular, if we have to change, as it was mentioned this morning, our business as usual systems to different business as usual systems, and we want to rely more on those ecosystem services which are no longer so much present in this type of landscape. So let me pick out one of those landscapes, the more intensive ones, and describe to you which possibilities of mitigation we have here. And the premise here for this mitigation is that we are having PPPs. They are available, they are affordable, and they're still effective. So the most significant action we can take to mitigate, as we heard in the previous presentations, is to reduce the amount of PPPs being used. What we can do is adapt things like precision farming, spot spraying, or use mechanical weeding instead. We could also go more for IPM, pest monitoring, organize ourselves more along economic thresholds when it comes to spraying. Of course, we can widen the crop rotations, which are also quite efficient. But if this all doesn't really work, we can also create refuge areas. So areas where there's no spraying and where species can accumulate that require such refuge areas. We can also go more into cultivar selection or mixed cultivars, so increase our genetic diversity within the fields, which is also shown to be efficient. We can limit dispersion by including windbreaks into the landscapes, for example, and also create buffer zones, again, as a kind of refuge area. This all has been shown in various studies to work quite nicely, but we can also, looking here at these different levels of system design, when it comes to here, for example, to plant protection, we can see that most of these levels are here called incremental, so it's increasing the efficiency of input use and reduce of costly, scarce environmental damaging inputs, or substitute conventional inputs with some alternatives. On this scheme here, we see that those incremental changes are listed here, but what's concerning us is that these arrows here are showing downwards to a system in transition, which means it's a system which is more sustainable, but has a lower productivity, which also means lower revenue. So even those incremental changes cause a drop in the efficiency of our production system, which is causing economic pressures to farmers. So if it's not compulsory to do that, usually farmers don't even do on a voluntary basis such incremental changes because it doesn't pay off to do it. So what we actually have to do, probably in order to go up again when it comes to productivity, to redesign our agroecosystems, so come to completely different ways of business as usual in doing agriculture. I would like to give you an example of a beetle bank to explain a little bit more what I envisage in this difference between incremental change and system redesign. So here we have a really nice so-called beetle bank. It's basically a small embankment in the middle of the landscape, which is extremely nice when it comes to supporting richness of species of birds, of pollinators, of carabids, of spiders. They all are really happy on such a beetle bank. If we continue production as usual in the fields nearby, so we use pesticide products as we did before, that's fine for the species here. They find refuge. It's nice for species conservation. But agricultural production and species conservation here are separate issues, and this is incremental change as I understand it. So there's no or little harnessing of ecosystem services by the farmers in the field. They don't rely on these services, they don't care, but they have a beetle bank and they can show we do something for conservation. We use the same beetle bank, but now with a different perspective as of the farmers, because now the beetle bank is providing food and nesting resources and refuge for natural biocontrol agents and pollinators. So those service providers that Lorraine has mentioned. Now the farmer sees, okay, those are supporting the pollination of my crops and support the natural biocontrol. And I actively demand those ecosystem services, and I adapt my management. So I plant, for example, more crops that also require pollination, because I have the pollination service in my area. And here conservation and use of biodiversity are spatially connected. And I transition my system, I redesign the system to using agroecological practices. So that's the difference in particular in the head of the farmers. So now we have a problem with this, because here we substitute those external inputs with biological processes. But the situation is we're losing all these species in our agricultural systems. So we're losing the agroecological potential. So what is going to happen if we do not have this present any longer? Are those system redesigns really work, or how long would it need to really redesign such a system? And what can we do when it comes to transformational strategies? Well, again, we can use the same basically incremental changes, which are useful anyhow, but at the same time we have to refurbish our landscape. So we need at least 20% of semi-natural elements in our landscapes, so that those meta-populations that have been mentioned could really strive, that we have reproduction areas for those species, creating those ecosystem services, that they can really become active. We can, of course, further diversify our cropping systems. We can introduce agroforestry systems. We can also go more into details when it comes to targeted flower strips. Flower strips really designed for supporting biocontrol agents. We can also accompany this with companion plants into the fields, attracting the natural biocontrol agents from the flower strip into the field. We can do intercropping, strip cropping, all types of mixed cropping systems. And we can often even go to trap crops and push-pull systems. So this is a complete redesign. We reduce dramatically the amount of pesticides we need and use in those systems. In theory, we know this from research, all these things function, but do they function really as a system in a landscape? And what are the risks? There are many, many open questions when it comes to those redesigns. So how much natural, semi-natural habitat is really required, how many targeted flower strips have to be located in the landscape, in which distance from each other, and so on. And as we see here, that many of those measures are not really integrated into our agriculture presently. They may be really efficient, but they are basically not well known in practice and not well known by farmers. So what we need here is essentially to increase the knowledge about how those systems really function. We need practical knowledge, and what we are really good at the minute are field experiments. So we know a lot about the processes, the functions, the interactions. If we have a nice innovation, we are also able to demonstrate this innovation on farm networks. But I propose we have to go a little bit further into the functioning and also acceptance of those innovations within the systems by looking, for example, into agroecological living labs, so do more transdisciplinary research with the farmers, co-designing such measures together with the farmers, or even groups of farmers in a landscape, to see whether such redesign really works, because it's never as secure as using a pesticide. A pesticide is clear it works. Whether such structures work, it may depend on the landscape, on the weather, and so on. How can we proceed with this? How can we create such knowledge? Basically here what you can see is a simplified interaction between agricultural production and biodiversity, and those landscapes I've shown earlier, we can put on this S-shaped curve here, showing the relationship between biodiversity and agricultural production. And if we want to make a change, we can draw this target line of biodiversity-friendly production here. And by drawing this target line, we create an option space. In this option space, we can develop those landscapes into by either looking more at the conservation aspect of biodiversity or the harnessing of the agricultural of biodiversity as a resource for agricultural production, or even both. And it could be based on incremental change or system redesign. I can't go into this concept in detail, but I wouldn't like to, but we can discuss it afterwards. During coffee probably. What I would like to point you to are those arrows here, what we call transformation pathways. And they are the co-designed pathways with the farmers, and the farmers decide, okay, I would like to go for incremental change, I would like to do more for conservation, no, I would like to harness more of the ecosystem services, I would like to go for system redesign. This is something which is occurring here in those transformation pathways. But as I said, our knowledge is not very good about that. So what we can design is something like agroecosystem living labs, which are located in different places of this option space here, where we can work together with the farmers on very different and regionally adapted and applicable ways of redesigning our ways of, doing farming, essentially. And this is a proposition together with farm demonstration networks. I think this would bring us a great step ahead. So to conclude, incremental measures at field and landscape level, they do work, they are fine. They can help mitigation, dispersion, reduce post-application transfers, reduce organism vulnerability. They can preserve food resources, ecological connectivity and habitat space. However, they're often not economically sustainable. Either we force farmers to do that or we have to compensate them in a way. More efficient, of course, is agroecological transition of farming systems. This would significantly reduce the contamination, be efficient in mitigation, but here we need more knowledge, practical knowledge about those systems, how they function, whether they function. And this, of course, has an effect also on, let's say, the way we use pesticides in those systems, and has effects also on regulation, because we need completely different ways of thinking about applying a pesticide in such a system, which can dramatically change the ecosystem service potential, which we build up over time. So we need other ways of regulation here. Thank you very much.
So you can stay here. So thank you. So we can open now the Q&A. So thank you for taking the time and avoiding me dancing. So we have now a little bit less than 15 minutes for questions. Don't be shy. So I think we got a good overview on the complexity of the topic, on some ideas on how to address the topic into the risk assessment, prospective risk assessment, but also some way to mitigate the risk, let's say, as a retrospective risk assessment in a way, indicating that the need of having or moving towards a system-based approach, because there are several actors that might play a key role in addressing these indirect effects. So, any question from the audience? Please, would like to ask you to be concise and also to introduce your name and your affiliation if possible.
Hi, my name is Sonja Block. I'm working for KPMG. And my question was towards Jens Dauber, and it is on working with the farmers, basically. So how do they receive the mitigation measures you are proposing? What is their reaction? I know you say they're still room for more practical evidence, but I'm wondering what is the message from the farmers really? What is their perspective on this? Thank you.
Yeah, so actually we are working together with farmers in such projects. So we are running some of those agricultural or agroecology living labs. Also at the landscape scale, so we have kind of landscape labs where we work with a lot of farmers in the landscape. And they are highly motivated because they tell us, so we don't force them to work with us. Of course, it's on a voluntary basis. But they say, okay, we realize the way we did farming in the last decades, it doesn't work any longer. Our crop rotations are no longer working really. We have problems with resistance of weeds and things like that. So we want to make changes. Or when it comes to climate adaptation, erosion control, though they are intrinsically motivated and they're looking for solutions. And we're trying to, with these landscape labs, to get out of the regulatory situation they're in, out of the economic pressure, release them and give them possibility to become innovative. And together we design measures and we try to implement them in the landscape. And of course we monitor from an economic but also an ecological perspective whether it works or not. It's not easy. But it's very, very interesting.
Thank you. Carlos? Okay,
Thank you very much, Carlos Neves, Chief Scientist. Jens, also perhaps to you, because I was just wondering, I mean, and perhaps a little here biased, since I was on this IPBES biodiversity nexus assessment. One of the arguments we heard there when we discussed scenarios was that this connectivity, the small patches of land, you know, the rotations, they were difficult because of the old mantra of, you know, for robotization, for machinery, this is not practical, and so on and so on. And then, of course, there was this balance of new technology, AI, drones, that it could be an enabler to make some of these solutions which were tagged as farmer unfriendly could finally be possible because they open doors indeed for a differentiated irrigation, plant control measures in small or bigger plots of little difference. Is this being factored into some of these model scenarios and analysis, how to harness this AI, this high tech or modern tech to make these biosolutions more farmer friendly?
Yes, I would say it should be done. There are different perspectives when it comes to, let's say, agroecology. There is a perspective that AI, drones, and so on, precision farming systems can facilitate all this. So to go back to smaller fields, more precision farming based on agroecological principles. There are others saying no, agroecology should not be coupled with machinery and technology and so on. I think from a farmer's perspective, it depends whether the farmer can really afford this. So I think there are systems where farmers make really good revenue, where you can adapt this and it's easy for the farmers because it's the farm is big enough, or you have cooperatives working together where they can afford such systems. When it comes to smallholder farming systems, many of those farmers basically can't afford that. So we have probably create or shape both ways, with those innovative technologies and without, and have to find solutions for both.
Any other question? Please, Thomas first.
Hello, Thomas Preuss, Bayer. My question would go maybe to Lorraine, but maybe all of you can take that. We are now talking here about 1107 pesticide registration, and my question to Lorraine would be: you showed what can happen on ecosystem service from some direct effects. How important is that if this is done by insecticide 1 or insecticide 2? So in principle, we need to come to a conclusion: is this compound safe or not? Can I do that with this indirect effect chain?
So I think you've highlighted another complexity, which is we tend to look at substances one at a time. That's how we regulate. Yet everything we're talking about here, when we're talking about ecosystems, is a multi-stressor problem. And it's not just pesticides, it's how we manage those landscapes. So in an ideal world, the answer is we would take a multi-stressor approach to that. We would look at how landscapes are designed, we'd look at how they're managed, and pesticides would be one component of that. And of course, it's not a single pesticide, it's a package of pesticides, which is, I think, maybe what's behind your question. Unfortunately, we're not in that ideal world. So I agree, if we were starting with a blank sheet of paper, that's where we should start. But where we are now is we consider one substance at a time, and therefore we have to take the view that all other things being equal, if we apply this additional substance, well, we have additional effects. It doesn't mean other stressors or other pesticides are also not having effects. But within the assessment of a single substance, I think you just have to be pragmatic and take that approach. But you're absolutely right. And the other thing we don't consider is, of course, interactions between different stressors. That's another colloquium, probably.
Trophic, BSF. Now, farming is a lot more than just plant protection products. Essentially, the farmer's work is to create really good growing conditions for his crop and then later harvest it. A lot of these other actions also really have direct and indirect effects. Plowing upsets the structure and, of the soil, release greenhouse gases, etc. It lasts for a long time. Harvest itself really completely resets the ecosystem. So how are you going to make sure when you only regulate one part of it that the farmer doesn't do other things instead? Look at strawberries, how they are being grown. They're going from field to undercover or plastic mulch. It's not exactly environmentally friendly either. Of course, there's many other reasons than pests and pathogens for this. Cost of labor, etc., the difficulty of getting labor in Europe. But how are you going to ensure that stricter plant protection product regulation doesn't lead to a worse outcome?
So you're looking at me, Pernille.
I'm looking at all of you.
So I won't assure it because it's not my job. But in a way, that's a continuation of Thomas's point, isn't it? It's the fact that you've got a very complex system where you've got multiple pressures on that system. And what you're alluding to is you might get unintended consequences. So yes, you may prevent impacts through one thing, one management technique, for example, application of a plant protection product or a particular plant protection product. But as a consequence, you may get other management techniques or other plant protection products being used that have different but equally important impacts. And again, that's thinking about the whole system. And it's coming to the same point that really, if you're going to protect and manage our ecosystems, we need to think about them as a system, and it's an ecological social system because its impacts on the farmers and the other stakeholders, as well as ecological components. Jens, do you want to pick up on that?
Also say food agronomists when we discuss how to do it.
Yes, definitely. Basically, it all comes down to money in the end. But as Lorraine said, we have to apply systems thinking, and the farmers do that. I mean, they run a farm, which is a system for those. So it's bottom up. It's easy to get a farmer into thinking about the system. It's not so easy for politicians, because what we have is a silo policy. We have a silo on pesticide use, we have a silo on soil health, we have a silo on biodiversity, and at the policy level, the system thinking is lacking. And that's probably what we have to achieve in the future to bring this policy action more into system thinking, and then it will nicely trickle down to reshape our agricultural production systems and food systems.
We have time for another question. Rachel?
Thanks. It's probably a question for Jens on the mitigation. So if I understand correctly, you're suggesting that the farmers need a flexible approach and that they can make decisions depending on their individual farm and their landscape, etc. Can you envisage information arriving from a regulatory system being useful to farmers? Could you imagine that information on the pesticides that they are using that would be interesting to them, to allow them to make better decisions on which pesticide and how they're going to use it? Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I'm not into regulation, but I can think about such systems, yes. I mean, there will be a new way of farmers approaching pesticides and pesticide use, because in those completely redesigned systems, of course, the idea is ideally in the endpoint to not use pesticides, which is probably a bit unrealistic. So there will be always situations where pesticides have to be used. But then you need a better not only regulation, but also information as a farmer, which of the pesticides would solve the problem at hand best without risking to distort the system that was created, because it's a very vulnerable system. And if you really, for example, use a pesticide which is leading to those trophic cascades, and so that we've shown, maybe the work you invested over the last couple of years to install those populations you need for the services is gone. So you need a much better thinking about the impact those pesticides are going to have, and what's the best, let's say, application regulation for those under the given situation. It's very difficult for me to explain this, sorry. It's complex.
Okay, so I think we cannot take any questions because we are almost close to the coffee break. So I would like to thank you very much for your very excellent introduction to the topic. So it is clear that I mean the complexity is here, and I mean was here already, because we know we have even different legal frameworks. So the 1107, the Sustainable Use Directive, and others. But I think the most important is to give the right tools to all the players. And moving towards, let's say, the same goal for reducing the impact. So thanks a lot, and now it's time for the coffee break. I just want to remind you when to keep the badge also when you go home, because there are seeds inside, so you can plant and see flowers growing. So thank you very much for thank you.
Welcome back. I hope you had a good coffee. Good to see you all back. It's always a fear that we have when we have a break, is that we lose people, but now we see you all back, so that's really good. So, welcome to the next part of our colloquium. What we have arranged for you now will be a panel discussion. We have 6 panelists for you. The aim of this session really is to explore in a bit more depth the different points of view from the different stakeholders that will need to be involved if this process of providing greater protection to the environment is going to be successful. So I'd like to invite to the stage our 6 panelists. Please take your seats here. As they're making their way, just to briefly introduce the 6 that we have. In fact, what we have arranged is people coming from different sectors with an interest in environmental risk assessment, so representing research, NGOs, the agrochemical industry, farmers, and also the European Environmental Agency. So very briefly, welcome to Marta Baccaro from the Joint Research Centre, welcome Marta, to Martin Demin from Pan-Europe, so Pesticide Action Network, welcome Martin, Virginie Ducrot from Bayer Crop Science, welcome Virginie, Christian Hugues from Indirect, so that's the French National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and the Environment. We have Brian McShay from the European Environment Agency, and to finish off our group of 6 we have Max Schulman from Koper-Kojeka. So that is the interest group for European farmers. So welcome to the 6 of you. What we will be doing, how we will organise this session is each panellist will have 3 minutes to put forward their point of view on principal challenges in the area of the implementation of environmental risk assessment for pesticides. And then we will have a discussion between our panelists reflecting on their contributions with a view not just to have a chat, but also with a view to the forthcoming breakout groups that we have this afternoon to try to provide some material for EFSA's consideration for the development of the tasks that you heard about this morning, in fact. And then we will open the floor to questions from the participants here. So you'll have an opportunity also to participate into the discussion towards the end. So that's what we have for you. By the way, my name is Tobin Robinson. I'm currently in charge of EFSA's plants unit. This unit is responsible for the environmental risk assessment of pesticides, and in addition for the health of plants with respect to invasive pests and diseases. So I have the pleasure and the pride to say that it is the unit I'm responsible for that has been organising this particular event, but also because the work that will be done on the guidance development will be centred in that unit as well. Right, well, let's get to it. So, dear, I was going to say contestants, no, it's dear panelists. You have 3 minutes each, great if you can keep to that, to tell us what you see are the principal challenges that you see in this area. And let's, in no particular order, let's kick off with Marta from JRC. Marta, please. Yes, if you could stay there. Yes.
It's working. Yeah. Okay, Tobin already introduced me, myself. So I think we heard already multiple times this morning that indirect effects are complex, and in a prospective assessment, we know that it's not possible to assess them in an ecotoxicological study made in a lab. And they are a result of processes that are very complex, as I said, involving interaction that have between biotic and abiotic factors. So we know that also are the result of multiple stressors we heard right before. However, although they are not limited to trophic interaction, I think that to be pragmatic, including, for instance, predator and competition within the assessment of chemicals, of pesticides in this case, is no doubt an essential step forward in the overall chemical risk assessment in a prospective way. So, as already mentioned also earlier today, food webs models, I think, could represent a crucial tool to address this issue. For instance, within a prey-predator relationship, for instance, reproductive failure in the prey species of course, leads to a cascade of events, and this is well documented to a certain extent. It's well studied. We also know, anyway, that there are less studied effects, for instance, behavioral effects that also Clementine mentioned earlier, for which we don't have standard tests to run, that can have potentially devastating impacts. Let's just mention one, which is, for instance, the impact of chemicals on parental care behavior, that is having then less successful nesting and breeding in birds, for instance. We know that, but in my opinion, if we could just start identifying the relationship amongst so-called reference species, representing reference ecosystems, sounds easy, of course, it's not, and to try to extrapolate growth, mortality, reproductive endpoints that are normally measured in a lab, then we could somehow model this interaction in a very simplistic way, perhaps, but we could start. And then when knowledge is more and more mature, we could add more endpoints, more species, more relationships, and to refine the analysis. Of course, I'm the first one aware that actually any alteration of the baseline functioning of the web, of the web model, can be made by any alteration at any biological level of the trophic chain. So actually anything could be, we would end up with very many parameters, endless number of parameters. So let's not already get overwhelmed by that. Let's start simple and let's think about a modular approach. This of course requires knowledge, a lot, not only from ecotox, but especially about population dynamics. And just to finalize, I would like to mention that we are not starting from scratch. I mean, this is directly mentioned in the last Birds and Mammals guidance of 2023 in the appendix. I just read it there, so I just repeat it. And then just last comment, this on a long term, this approach perhaps could also align with the general objectives of the Commission to phase out animal testing. Because if we parameterize as much as possible representative specific species and food web and so on a long term, this perhaps can help a future animal-free assessment.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marta. Let's go to Marta, please.
Thank you, Tobin, and thank you for inviting me to speak in this panel. It's for us a very important colloquium. Indeed, we feel that still among the scientific community, the indirect effect of pesticides is still unknown. There's already a lot of science on it, but it's really underestimated. We really support EFSA in this work, and we also want to underline that for us, having a high level of scientific expertise that is undue with conflicts of interest is also really important. What's very important for us is to already map what we know, what we don't know, and what we need to know to regulate on indirect effects. As we already saw this morning in the presentations, it's a very complex topic, and EFSA could get lost in trying to understand more, and more research is needed. In the end, we never decide. So I agree with Marta when you say we need to have something rather simple as a starting point, and then try to regulate based on that and maybe improve it in the future. But biodiversity protection needs to happen now. I also wanted to come back to the EU pesticide legislation. This morning, 2 out of the 3 presentations were about ecosystem services for humans. Functional biodiversity, of course, is very important, especially in the framework of the development of agroecology and using nature to produce food. But the EU legislation is about protecting biodiversity, not functional biodiversity. So it's biodiversity as a whole that needs to be protected. And I would also like to remind this because we see that the topic is shifted towards functional biodiversity, and it's not enough in our view. And anyways, both are strongly interrelated. I fully agree with what Professor Malby said earlier, is that we need to have a good risk assessment of direct impact, direct effects first, to be able to assess the indirect effects. So having a good update of the guidance documents. We have, for the moment, as you were saying, the terrestrial ecotoxicology that is under revision, but also the development of other guidance documents like the reptiles and amphibians that is still on hold, a bats guidance document, and so on, that are also very important central organisms in the food web, and for which we basically don't know much. So just one word on modeling. Of course, we will need to make use of models, but if we want to simplify the system, we also need to be humble before what we don't know. And I mean, history of risk assessment, risk management shows that we are not protective enough. We authorize products and then we see that in the end they're too toxic. So 20, 30 years later, we ban them to protect humans or the environment. So we need to, it's good to use models, but that we need to test them, of course, and then add safety factors to ensure to have a better protection. I'm almost done. Tobin, you mentioned talking about risk mitigation measures. Eventually, it was already discussed by Jens this morning. Just 2 points. One is that IPM is a very good risk mitigation measure, but you present it as an option, but in the EU since 2014, it's supposed to be mandatory, according to the directive. It's not implemented properly. And one of the reasons, and I'm coming back to the question from Rachel, is that member states do not comply with their obligation under the Sustainable Use Directive to provide independent farm advisory services that could really support improving the situation. Last point, I want to invite all of you to join us on the 15th of July in the European Parliament. We are organizing a conference on bugs and bees and pesticides. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Marta. And then let's go to Virginie, please.
Hello. Happy to be with you today. I think we are all in this room today because we don't want to compromise between producing food in Europe and having a safe environment. And solving this equation in a risk assessment, this is something that is really challenging for us to do. So we have some tools on our way to assess indirect effect, as you mentioned, Martin. And it's true that the indirect effects parts on the food chains needs to be further explored. So how do we start in exploring this missing piece? I would propose to start by looking at the farmer's intervention. So when we are in field, all the farmer's interventions will go towards producing food and growing a crop. So could it be soil preparation, irrigation, harvest, crop protection? All of this will create a shift of the resource for the benefits of the crop. And this is, if we look at crop protection in particular, so the use of pesticides or other weed or pest or disease control methods, those methods, when they are deployed in the fields, they really need to be very efficient. So in general, when they are deployed, it's because you have a pest or a weed infestation and you really need to get out of this so that you can use the other tools from the IPM toolbox we were hearing about this morning. And also this regulation 1107 for the registration of pesticides, it requires that all the pesticides are highly efficacious. So what I'm trying to say here is that when a pesticide is used to manage a pest infestation, it will not be the case that you will see that an herbicide doesn't have a strong effect against the weed. And it will not be the case that you see that an insecticide doesn't have a strong effect against the arthropods. So the starting point is we will have strong direct effects in the fields. And then the question is, will these effects be translated? Will this create indirect effects on the food chains? And to answer this question, we know that whether or not and how much these effects are translated, it really depends on the quality and the the availability of the habitat in the off-field, and this is defined by the landscape in the farm, so around the cropping area. So that being said, what can we do today to tackle our questions, looking at solutions? So in our risk assessment, I think we have the tools to quantify the direct effects from the pesticide use in the field. From this, we can use models to predict what will be the indirect effects from these direct effects on the food web and on the landscape. For this, we can use some modeling tools, from food web models up to more complex landscape models and ecological scenarios, as we saw today. And if the risk assessment shows us that there is a risk for indirect effects to the food chain that is unacceptable, also in view with other farmer intervention, we also want to be here having a good benchmark. If we feel that we need more risk mitigation, our models will tell us what kind of mitigation we need and when. And we have shown with the presentation of Jens that there are risk mitigation that work already. Some of them are in the EU Compendium for Risk Mitigation already, and we have already some models. So I think we are at a good starting place to start looking together at what we can do. And I'm really happy to discuss this with you today.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's go for Brian, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tobin, for the invitation, and to all the organisers. I'm Brian McSharry. I work in the European Environment Agency, which is a sister agency of EFSA, so it's a pleasure for us to be working with you on different projects and to be here as well. I'll try and give a kind of a bit of an overview on biodiversity, maybe jumping up a few scales to the policy level, with some really interesting presentations by Carlos and Clementine, Jens and Lorraine this morning, talking about really detailed aspects, and I was busy taking lots of notes. But maybe kind of scaling it up a little bit, we know we're in the middle of a biodiversity crisis. We see this from a lot of research and a lot of literature. It's connected as well to the triple planetary crisis of, climate change and pollution, and these are all kind of a risk multipliers to what's happening. So, when one gets bad, the rest get bad, and then they all get worse and so forth. But echoing what was said this morning, when we look at the work done by countries under EU biodiversity policy legislation, we do see what was said this morning. We see the fact that in our State of Nature report, which is done every 6 years, 81% of habitats submitted by countries are considered to be in a poor or bad condition. And what we do know is we know the why for these things. So we have the facts, we know the numbers. We also know a lot about why it's happening. And one of the reasons is use of agrochemicals. It's not the only one. But we also see from that there is, direct and more indirect impact. So we know on some grasslands, we expect there will be some impact on those. But when we look at the quality and condition of, say, rivers and lakes, we see, unsurprisingly, a negative perception, but also then in mudflats and estuaries and what you see in that kind of the shallow waters and near water, inshore waters, we see similar impacts coming from land-based products, not exclusively pesticides, but including pesticides on that. So we get a lot of facts and figures on this. We also know that pollinators, for example, are one of the key species that are impacted by different chemicals. We're just launching a briefing today, I think at 12 o'clock, talking about pollinators, which could be quite interesting. But again, some facts and figures from that, I think, which are stolen or plagiarized or copied from JRC nicely, is we see that when we estimate what pollinators bring to the agricultural system, in Europe, we see it's 5 to 15 billion euro just given for free. We also know that about 84% of crops and 78% of wildflower species are dependent on pollinators, and pollinators are then dependent upon them. And these have a lot of direct benefits, but also a lot of indirect benefits. So they increase soil fertility, they store water, and we're in a water crisis at the moment. They also help store carbon. We're in a climate crisis. They've got cultural services as well. They're just nice to look at. And then at a policy level, I think from a biodiversity policy level, it strikes me that perhaps maybe we're not as connected as we should be. Our big drivers are the nature directives and the new nature restoration regulation. But I think what we do need to have is more effective and coordinated and workable solutions where we bring in the different actors and have conversations with them and really kind of try and find something that's inclusive and collaborative, so that, you know, we come with these multiple benefits. Because if we do this correctly, we're having productive agricultural land, we're having high quality food, and we're having a healthy biodiversity. And we're addressing the climate crisis as well. So it's a bit of a win-win-win if we do it correctly. And that's what I kind of like to listen here is what are the thoughts and how can we get there? So don't know if I've gone over my time or not, but done.
Thank you, Ryan. Christian, please.
Thank you. It's very interesting to be here and happy to share the floor with so tremendously brilliant panelists. To build on what just Brian said, in fact, where we are today, we are far beyond the planetary boundaries. And in fact, we are trying to deal with guidelines, recommendations on text, but we are all related with what was decided in 2009 with the 1107 regulation or the seed directive. And in fact, in 16 years, the world has tremendously changed. In 2009, it was also the first definition by Rockstrom of the planetary boundaries, and it was not that bad. Out of the 9 planetary boundaries, 5 are related with agriculture and food, and there was only one at that time that was broken. Today, the 5 that are related to agriculture and food are just blown out. So in fact, in my mind, it's not anymore the time to say, how can we reduce that? The point is how we recover, how we restore, how we rebuild. And so the ambition must be quite tremendous. This is the first point. The second point is that in the same time, the knowledge has progressed tremendously. Tremendously. The knowledge, the understanding we have of what is the real world, what is the living world, has changed a lot. And I think this is giving opportunity to define new approach of the risk, but also to define new options. Because, and Max will probably say that, crop protection is compulsory. We need crop protection, no doubt about that. The point is not to have a sustainable use of pesticide. The point is to have a sustainable crop protection. How can we do that? If we carry on as we are today, we are going to dead ends. Less pesticide available for regulation, because of regulation, less pesticide, and this is the key point, less pesticide because of emergence. Just try to find an herbicide that is efficient in southern Sweden against grass weed. There is nothing left. And nothing in the pipeline. So how we move on? There are very good opportunity. We discover the tremendous potential of the plant microbiome and more generally of this layer that is completely unknown. So it's not to say just use it and it's over. No, no. How can we dig in that? What we learn about the volatile organic compound for controlling insects, this is offering tremendous potential. And everything that is related with crop improvement and plant breeding. So we have possibilities. But at the same time, we cannot say that the cropping system will stay as they are, simply because the climate change will get there. And just try to figure out what is going to be the climate of Brussels in 2050, and you will see that it is going to be far away from Belgium. And so it is going to be completely different. And it also means, and this is something that is extremely exciting, we can, and Virginie said, when we have a disease, we have to spray it. That's okay. The point is how we avoid to have a disease, how we avoid to have a pest, how we avoid to have a weed. And so we have completely to change our mindset about active prophylaxis. And in that case, we would, sorry, Tobin, you will lose your job because you will not have anything to evaluate anymore. But so you asked the question, what is new for evaluation of the risk? In fact, I think our mindset have to change. We are still in the idea that we evaluate one product, one target. In fact, we have to accept that we are dealing with systems. And Marta, you said we are dealing with food web. Food web is an ecosystem. And the point is how we are opening our mind on that. We have plenty of new possibilities for evaluating, assessing the risk. The high throughput omics is giving tremendous opportunities. You can approach many functions, many organisms all at the same time. we have an option offered by artificial intelligence that is not because it's going to sell the solution, it's because it's going to give patterns that are completely different. Modeling is one thing, but modeling means that you have an underlying pattern. Some pattern we do not know. Artificial intelligence could help us in that, which means that instead of having only ecotoxicologists on board, we need more disciplines being there. We need ecologists. We need omics people. They are very numerous. We need data scientists. They are not so numerous and they are very expensive. And the point is, and to get back to what Marta and Martin said, in fact, we have to define what we want to look at. Because you can spend your whole life to assess an impact of something and you will still retire not having covered everything. So we need proxies and we have to identify what is essential in environment, in human health. And my gut feeling is the fact that if we go to this microorganism layer, you have a lot of indication because they are very, very responsive, sometimes too responsive, so you could be misleading. And my time is nearly over. I think one of the things we have to change also in our mindset is to make all the data open. Because when something new is coming, you have to start from scratch. And this is a loss of time, a loss of money. If you accept to do this, it's because we still have a lot of money. So we have, in fact, to go into a direction where we are sharing a lot. We need a unique European system. Stop with all these member states that are not sharing anything. And this is the first thing. And having an open data, completely open data for ERA, this should become the rule. And I think there are tremendous potential there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Christian. And to finish, we have the people at the sharp end of all of this, the farmers. Please, Max.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It works. Very good. No, thank you very much for letting me be here, to inviting me here. And I think that the beginning, I liked really all the three keynote presentations because they really set the scene and showed how complex the system, the situation is. I have been a farmer since 1986, and I have seen quite a bit change during that time. Not only the climate around us, but also plant protection products in my portfolio, how they have actually been working quite well. And now we see that actually the effectiveness is not there. So why do we use them? Why do we as farmers use plant protection products? It's to protect what we grow. We are expecting to get from there a yield and quality. But we are not stopping there. The main thing is also for us to be able to sell this forward, so we are not alone. We are also looking at the whole chain, not only the chain at farm level, down into the biodiversity, to the waterways. No, we are looking also into the full food chain. We have to deliver also to that. So that's what I think is very important always to go back and say, what do we really want to achieve? We are aiming at feeding the European consumers, maybe even a little bit more outside Europe. If we cannot do that, what's going to happen? Yes, we will also be there importing stuff as well. Inside Europe, we have a good control. At least from the farmer's point of view, I mean, we are an old profession, but we are absolutely not an old-fashioned profession. We use all the possible tools that we can use, but we have in our possession to be able to do our job the way how we are supposed to do it. We are following regulations. Usually we do it very heavily, but at the same time we also once in a while have to think about it. Wait a second, you have here a regulation that actually is counteracting with what I really can see that would be the best possible thing to be done. For example, was mentioned here mechanical de-weeding. We have there an open fallow land. We have plowing. That should be one of the best methods to do so. It has been practiced for hundreds of years already. The plow is still there. If it would not be a good tool, it would have disappeared. But some countries, some member states, but also EU legislation do not like that you have ground that is not covered in a crop. So I mean, here we have a system that is counteracting a little bit how we as farmers would actually use our knowledge and to be the best one to do it on our fields as well. So what I would like to bring into the discussion is, let's go down to the field level. Let's go down to see what the farmers really can do. What do we learn down there? How can we transfer the knowledge then from academia, from R&I, into the farming community in such a way that it fits in to the food chain as a whole? Because we produce for the food chain. We are not producing just for ourselves. And I think that here we have a possibility to bring in some AI, artificial intelligence connected with authentic intelligence, the farmer knowledge, the knowledge from the academia into this system, and then try to break the silos, as we have seen already so many times inside the Brussels bubble. We have been trying to work with this. Still today, the silo approach, unfortunately, is the strongest one. That's why we have a big hope now with the vision for agriculture and food. It is the first time we see that there is an approach where actually the different commissions are somewhat and somehow connected to a same goal. Let's see how this is going to work. So I'm waiting, let's say, for quite interesting questions from you. I will not go into deeper details yet, but let's continue with the panel.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you to all six of you for sharing your thoughts on this subject. And certainly one of the first things which also came out, in fact, from this morning's presentations is the complexity of what we have to look at. The potential interactions in the ecosystems are almost infinite. The amount of data that we have available, of course, is a mere drop in the ocean compared to all of those interactions. And we need to come up with something, not necessarily today, but in the near future, and today's event will be contributing to that. We have to come up with something that is practical and implementable to address that complexity. I'll be interested, and I'm sure the audience too, in hearing your thoughts on how do we introduce a simple, practical system to address all of this complexity. You can either volunteer to speak or I pick someone.
I can start up with that. I mean, the main thing for us as farmers would be to make sure that we have products that really do their job. You really have to go in fit for purpose. That's the main thing. I mean, to look into that and see. At the same time, when you look at the farm landscape, you look at our fields, that's our production unit. But we are only borrowing it from the next generation or from the new farmers. So what we are trying to do is to maintain and make it better all the time, keeping all the time in mind that we are using the tools that we have there available today. We are very fast in adapting new tools as long as they are there on the market. And today, that is a big problem. Our toolbox is shrinking. We have very difficult to follow IPM, because suddenly you have only one product on the market. Where is the possibility to use IPM anymore in some regions? We are here now looking at the European level. We have to face it on member state level. That brings in a little bit more complexity into this discussion. And then we also have to look at it at sectorial level. European level, it still looks somewhat okay. But when you go down to member state and to a sector, it could be that we have lost already today all the available plant protection products. And that is unacceptable, because we are also working on common single market approach inside Europe. And we do not have that approach today whatsoever. So that's why we are very keen in trying to be part of this and try to help as much as possible with information, with ideas, but also listen to you and see where we can interact, because we need a bigger toolbox. We need more predictability into our lives, because today you have maybe some products on the market and tomorrow you are informed, sorry, next year it will not be there. You might have just changed your crop rotation. You have just learned how it works together with the rotation that you have, since the market has been pushing for a certain type of crops that you should bring in. So we are not either the one that chooses always what to grow. We might be part of a cooperative that have changed a little bit what they will do We might be in an area where suddenly you have a new player in the market. They have invested millions, for instance, in plant protein production. We need to shift into those type of crops. And suddenly you have a heavy pressure suddenly on that region on pests and diseases, exactly a new type of crops. We need the tools. I'm just saying that it's not simple and easy.
So a regulatory system that will deliver pest control options. Any reflections on how to deal with complexity? Brian, please.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's some really interesting things said there. I mean, from my perspective, I think Max alluded to it. I think we now, with the food policy the Commission is going for, we see commissions moving in the same direction, which is very interesting. I think what we need to do is show the value of the different policies that we have. So I come from a very strong biodiversity policy background, and the biggest game at the moment is the nature restoration regulation. And I think what we need to do is show what is the value to the different sectors for that. How can it help, you know, Max and his colleagues and his other farmers in helping them to deliver food productivity? Because we talk about having these different policies for different things, but we also talk about having food security and food sovereignty. And again, what we're saying here is we're tying in geopolitical issues, we're tying in dietary issues, we're tying in climate issues, we're tying in biodiversity issues, we're tying in human and societal issues and economic issues together. And that adds into the complexity of it. But I think what I've seen in my lifetime of working in policy is the simpler it is, the more effective it is. And I think in my colleagues and I, we're very good at making the simple very complex. And I think what we need to do is be better at communicating, be better at finding the connections and those win-wins, and be more honest in saying, well, in this case, this wins over this. That's the balance here. But in this case, it's more balanced. In this case, this one. So I think finding synergies between policies and where they are contradicting themselves, which happens, working out how to avoid that, and then I think rewarding the different actors in there and making sure that the resourcing is available for different people to help protect the environment so that we have, I mean, the end goal is 41% of Europe's land area, more or less, is covered by agroecosystems. It is there to feed all of us. It is there to, you know, have different crops for us to use. You know, I don't think anyone reasonable is saying we need to change that into 5% or anything like that. I mean, it's part of our cultural heritage in Europe is to have fields, as Jens showed that, you know, slide at the end. That's what I grew up with when I went to my uncle's farms, small fields with lots of biodiversity around them. It's not there anymore. And, you know, they feel that as well. So I think recognizing what it is for our culture, but also recognizing the importance of all of these not adversarial policies, but complementary policies.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Please, Virginia.
Yeah. So looking back a little bit at our risk assessment, how could we address this high level of complexity? I think essential things are transparency of data, I liked the point, and transparency of models. We are very often afraid of complexity, but I think we have also ways to manage it. If you look at how we dealt with it in the EFSA area, and you look at the focus scenarios, they are super complex. They were built by an expert group. It took 10 years, and now those focus scenarios, they are constantly being discussed, revised. How many of us are using these tools without really knowing how much complexity is behind? And I think we can differentiate, like, having a user-friendly tool for risk assessors and modifiers to use, being designed by experts of the topics. And I see for indirect effects, we could also do this with experts in ecotoxicology, in agronomy, in ecology. We would give the task to these experts to come up with the right model, focusing on the right processes. I also like, to your point, Marta and Martin, not trying to put everything into it, but trying to really focus on the drivers of the questions. Having this transparently set in a cooperative manner and put in a tool that is user-friendly so that we can use it even if we don't understand the super high complexity about this. But for this to work, it needs to be open, to be transparent, and we need a little bit of trust to each other. And then I'm linking back to your point, Brian, is that if we want to address this topic of systems, we will be working in landscapes, in agricultural landscape. Otherwise, it's very difficult to solve this question. And a lot of what we do in the landscape, it's way beyond the frame of 1107. It calls for a lot of other regulations and landscape management. So this is, again, how can we go beyond the frame that is prescribed in this regulation and to come up with a good solution, and not trying to solve everything into a regulation that is not fit for that purpose. So it's just this silo between regulation, I think, is also something for us to address.
Excellent, thank you. Building on that, I mean, we've heard again this morning a lot of interest and desire to have a more systems approach to environmental risk assessment. Here I'd ask the panel, do you think it is possible to evolve the existing regulation, which is very much looking at substance by substance approval, to one of a systems approach, or do we have to throw everything up in the air and start again? Christian, please.
No, sorry, Tobin, but I think your question is not right. Is there another option than moving away from the present situation? In fact, the present situation is the result of the history. The way we were looking at the world as it was some 20 years ago, it's simply different. So there is no other option than thinking this as a system, as an ecosystem. The living organisms are much more complex, evolving much quicker than what we anticipated 20 years ago. So there is no way to stay where we are. That's it. One of the point that is maybe a prerequisite question is that we should not anymore oppose the long-term and the short-term vision. I fully understand the point of Max that it has to work. That's it. But it has to be also viable on the long term. So one of the points is the stability of the vision. And where is the vision established? And this is why always this balance between the EU level, national state, and possibly regional level, this is completely a source of instability. So you can, and I fully agree with you, if the next day you are not able to know what you are going to deal with, this is simply impossible. So we need a very long-term vision based on where we want to go. And crop protection must be sustainable, and we know that we will have to move differently away from where we are. So your question, sorry, Tobin, is not good.
Thank you.
Maybe if I can also add in something there, I think that we can most probably also with the 1107 we have today, maybe there is a possibility to look at it and see what can be tweaked underneath. Just as an example, I mean, nowadays we have pests that we are normally you only see and they occur mainly down at the Mediterranean regions. Nowadays, with the shift in the wind and the temperatures and all these, in 3 days I have these tourists up in my fields in the southern part of Finland. And we do not have anything in place that actually can take care of them at that stage. After 3-4 days, and that's very fast, that sometimes we can get it from our authorities, that means that we have already lost certain crops 100%. During a very fast time. So I think this kind of a more of a mutual recognition system that would work EU-wide without the zones are starting to be more and more in the place what we should go. Because we have to be able to react and act much faster. We also need time-wise, we cannot wait 10 years or even more to have a new product onto the market. That means that somebody else is driving past us. Our competitiveness is gone. We see farmers quitting because of this, leaving it. Then we see bigger farm sizes are coming in to force because you have people quit. Farmland is still there. We have seen farmland has stayed more or less stable in Europe. So we see that's why also we have a shift into bigger farms, more effective farms. We have higher cost level. What do? You start to use more technology to be able to make sure that you can do the job. You don't need so many workers. Workforce is quite expensive. I mean, we have also created a system here that actually should be stopped we should think about what has been created through the legislation we have today, and do we like it?
Thank you. Marta.
Thank you. Coming back to risk assessment, can you hear me? Yeah. No, I don't think we have to. I disagree with Christian. I think we have to maintain 1107 and this substance for substance approach, and on top of that, build this systems-based approach. First of all, because it will take probably 2 decades to build this in case we manage a systems-based approach. And then if we don't have the basic knowledge substance per substance, we won't be able to identify which substance is causing the disturbance of the agro-ecosystem. And the substance per substance approach, as we already discussed, is producing the data that allows to have take a more aerial view on ecosystems. So clearly, I think it's complementary. It should not replace it.
Please.
Just a quick comment. So I agree with almost all the comments of the colleagues. However, I think that we should decide if here in this room we are speaking about an evolution of the current framework, so to improve it, or we want to make a revolution, let's say, of the whole system, which I don't exclude is perhaps needed, but we should, I think, building on what you were asking, actually, being as realistic as possible. So this also maybe to explain a little better my earlier intervention. I mean, the fact of focusing on perhaps the testing strategies and how to perhaps improve that. The whole issue is not only focused on that, obviously, but I think, as I said, any incorporation of indirect effects, as I said, just maybe simple relationship would anyhow improve, and then we should see this as a modular thing to refine time stepwise with knowledge when it's mature. So I agree with all this, but as also Martin said, going back to risk assessment, let's say, I think we could, yes, use the current framework with the proper improvements.
Thank you. So one thing that's come up already in our panel discussion today, and I have to say comes up in probably every single meeting like this I've been in for the last 20 years or more, is the need to share data. Everybody agrees that we need to do this. Not many people do it. Who should be responsible for making something happen? Because I am frustrated, I think, like all of you, that we talk about it and yet we don't make any progress on this. Let's start here. Virginie, please.
So as I said, for us, data transparency and sharing data, this is very important because data is resource. It's really expensive to produce this data, as Martin said. And because of this, Bayer and some other companies have started already 5 years ago to put all the safety data online. So if you go, I'm speaking about Bayer because this is what I know best, this is where I work. But if you go to our website and you want to download, I don't know, bee study for neonics or any study on glyphosate, you go to the website and you will have access to the full study reports that we are submitting to the authorities. So in there, you will be able to see the raw data. The thing that we didn't do yet is to have this on a digital form. So you will get a PDF with numbers in it and somebody has to extract it so that you can reuse it for your own purpose. But in theory, the data are available. Now our next step is to get better at digitalizing it.
Okay, Marta, please.
Martin. Yeah, I think this is, of course, a very central topic. And I was just thinking, where I come from, in Jersey, we are informed about this. As an example, but maybe it's inspiring. We will have soon, in a few years perhaps, a central platform for chemical monitoring data, which will be hosted at a European agency. So perhaps, I mean, I don't want now to say that necessarily has to be on a level of a European agency, but definitely, unfortunately, also somehow a centralized system, I think, should be the way. And also an additional comment. We should, as mentioned many times already, break a little bit the silos, because, I mean, when we want to apply these food web models and extrapolate data from, I don't know, a mortality or reproductive test to population, we need ecologists to provide population dynamics data. So we should, let's say, design this platform in a little bit broader way and not confine ourselves in our subject, let's say, academic subject.
Okay. Let's pass the microphone down the line. Marta, do you want to? Oh, then Brian, please.
From my side, pass on to you next. I think different organisations have different roles here. So a lot of the EU agencies, I think, have a strong role in making sure their data is not only accessible but actually useful for use. I mean, in the European Environment Agency, we have a whole host of environmental data. If I'm being honest, I sometimes can't find what I'm looking for, and I've been working there for several years. We're getting better. We're evolving on a daily basis, making it more accessible and more usable. So I think a lot of what we currently have, we need to do a better job at making it accessible for people. But one of the things I've seen in my career is there's a lot of funding being given at the EU level for projects Horizon 2020. And I've always been struck by what happens to that data, where it is. And I think there's no repository for this information after, you know, a multi-million euro project. Where does it go? It's in a PDF, it's in a report somewhere. So I think we need to think about how can we make that more accessible and usable. And then is there a need for a body to do this, to put it forward as well? And I think that then can help share knowledge to different people. Also then as well, when we make the data available, make it accessible for people to use at different levels. I think in my career, we've been very good at making, here's the data, off you go. But often people don't want necessarily the data, they want the information from it. So offering people that kind of a tailored suite of products to say, this is the high level figure, this is the next level, and here's the data, this is all the metadata behind it, in different formats, I think is very important. So we definitely need to do more on it. We're gone an awful long way in the last few years, but we need to do a lot more.
Yeah, I would just like to add also to the data thing here very fast. I mean, we as farmers are sitting on a lot of data, as you know. And I mean, we are also working in a lot of projects, and we are feeding in a lot of data into these projects and all of these. So my question would also have been, have we actually been able to use that data as well as we should to be able to combine it? Second thing is, tell us what kind of a data it is needed, who will then have the access to it, and in which format you would like to have the data. And I think once in a while, to the farming sector, it comes more to the legislation, say, this is what you have to provide. There is never an explanation, how will it actually help me? What can this bring into the big discussion? So open up also this, and you might be able to see that the farmers are very willing to be part of this data sharing, and we can really get a lot out of it.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly, before we come to Christian, maybe two stories from EFSA on this. I would absolutely reinforce what you just said, Max. Our experience of data gathering and data sharing clearly shows that to have successful data gathering, you have to give something back to the people who are providing the data. If it, at a minimum, it's providing their own data back to them in a format that they can access. But of course, preferably the more added value you can give onto that data, then the more successful the whole process is going to be. So definitely reinforce that. Then anecdotally, I have to say, EFSA was mandated by the European Parliament a few years ago to work with stakeholders to put together a database on pollinators, on bees as a first step. Very interesting experience. I would say very successful in producing a database that serves the needs of a whole variety of stakeholders. but very little real enthusiasm, by which I mean money, to maintain a database beyond the end of EFSA's mandate to look at this. So sharing data is a nice thing as long as it's somebody else that's putting in the effort. When we have to do it ourselves, there seems to be maybe a bit less enthusiasm to back up the words. It's a shame as a real-life experience. It would be good to move beyond that in some way. Maybe we need more structured funding at a European level, but I don't think we can always go crying to mummy, asking for money from the European Union to support all of these activities. I think there has to be a bit more participation of the whole community into making these resources available. Christian, please.
I don't have a lot of things to add, but maybe just underlying that we are all in a situation where, as you said, we expect that the other will make the effort, and that we are always very moving that way very slowly. If you try to dig information out of EFSA, yeah, you have to be really committed. It's the same for if you go to the French resource, the public resource. Good luck. So the point is that's how we go there, and I'm not completely sure that I would follow what you said, Max. That we need to have an immediate feedback. I think if we go with more open data, we will have the possibility to have results that we do not expect. And I'm not completely specialist of AI, but AI is changing quite a lot because they don't worry about having the digital form. They can deal with PDF. They don't mind. So the point is definitely to go for having the data available somewhere. And when Brian said, where are all the data coming from the EU project? They are nowhere. Most of them are stored in computers of researchers and not made available. So in fact, we need just an extremely strong and again stable political sign that all data must be available. Just try to measure the quantity of pesticide that is used in Europe. This and this molecule. Good luck.
Excellent. Thank you. With that, I'd like to open the floor to you for your questions or comments to the panel or on the panel's discussion. Now is the time for you to get involved in this. So please, if you have anything to add, raise your hand. Okay, please. And could you also give us your name and your affiliation, please?
This is Brizas from Aristotle University. I agree that we should build on 1107, but before that, maybe we should consider to refine the protection goals and the data requirements, and maybe to distinguish between agroecosystems and natural ecosystems. Because as it said before, in agroecosystems we have functional diversity that we should put in priority. And in natural ecosystems we had different services that we should also give a priority. So maybe also we should consider to include in the protection goals the farmers' incomes, the agricultural production, the sustainability of agricultural production in Europe. So before going to create new models to incorporate AI, or even to include new approach methods and new testing methods for indirect effect, maybe we should consider to distinguish the protection goals and the data requirements within agroecosystems and in-field with outfield and natural ecosystem.
Okay, thank you for your question. Martin.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very important point you're making here because, again, when you read the pesticide regulation 1107, it says protect biodiversity. It doesn't say where. And when Virginie, you were saying when you spray a field, you kill all insects. Well, if you read really in a fundamental way the regulation, it says you also need to protect it the same way in the field and of the field. Of course, the risk assessors, risk managers do it differently. But clearly, I think on the long run, if we want to redevelop insect populations with beneficial insects and so on, of course, we also need to look at what's happening in the field when we use specific molecules and try to use more selective molecules or the ones that will have less impact on populations. Also, just by the fact that the in-field and off-field biodiversity are strongly interrelated, especially in areas of intensive agriculture.
I would not make exactly the same separation as you do. I don't think that you can say that there is a border at the agroecosystem. There is, this is a kind of perception of the large organism. It's not true at all for the microorganism. And there is no border. And there is nearly no natural ecosystem in the sense that without any human impacts over the last centuries in Europe and even in the world, we are discovering that Amazonia is not at all a wild forest. So it's a continuum there. We know that when you put a pressure here, by impact, there will be a pressure further. So I think we have to take this as a rule. I would like to go your way. This would make our lives simple, but I'm afraid it's not the case.
Just to add a little bit to the complexity as well, I mean, we are looking at it from the European perspective, EU perspective, let's say like this, but we have also borders outside, and we also know what happens there will also impact us. So, I mean, we also have to have, in that way, take this in consideration as well. So I agree, I mean, on-field, off-field, it is the same. A little bit different how it is working, but still they are connected 100%.
Thank you. Carlos, please.
So, before the next question, may I add something very quickly? I fully agree when we look at the processes in field and off field for how the species are moving and the interactions. This is it doesn't make sense to make a boundary. But then coming back again to the risk assessment, it's important that the protection goals are different in field and off field. Coming back to the point you were raising, Martin, if when you are using a pesticide, so we can reduce how often we use it, and we can try to use precision application to reduce the impact of that, or more selective products which are not easy to design. But basically the essence of it is that when you are at the point where you need pest control, it means you have a big infestation, and this has to be very efficient. So if you have a protection goal in fields that say we cannot tolerate more than small to negligible effect, then you are not able to do the job with your products, because what you want to do is to have a short but very effective effect for a short time. But then this is something that you cannot avoid. You can compromise on the efficacy of the products in field to a certain level, but if you decrease it too much, then you will not get your infestation controlled, and you are triggering some resistance issues. So this is where we have a problem, and this is where I think it's important to have the distinction between in-field protection goal and off-field protection goal, just to match this reality that in-field, when you are using a product, it has to be very efficacious.
I agree with you, but when you say when we have, the point is that the way we are running, we are considering that when you have a problem is becoming the rule. And in fact, because we consider this agroecosystem out of the rest, we have made our agroecosystem extremely fragile, porous to everything. As Mark said, there is a tourist coming from the south, and then simply because nothing is blocking it, all natural or ecosystem are becoming without any resilience. And the point is how we do that. In fact, it is possible, definitely, to build systems that are extremely more robust against emergence. There will be emergence. That is why we need products that are efficient. But if we use them always, they are losing efficiency, and then we are naked as babies.
Thank you. Carlos, please.
Thank you very much. I don't really want to monopolize this. This should be for the others, not for EFSA leaders to speak. But two topics were here brought up that are close to my heart. One, of course, microbiome, and the other is research money, probably the only one I'm allowed to lobby for area. But just to highlight here something I tried to also say in the beginning, but really important because, of course, Christian, you were mentioning the power of microbiome solutions, and you mentioned omics. And just to highlight here that this gap between scientific knowledge and the capacity to harness that and utilize it for regulatory purposes, this gap is inevitable. But without being pessimistic, I fear this gap is increasing because science is moving quicker and we are not. And the fact is that in environmental microbiome, an area where an EFSA just published a report on it as well last year, despite knowledge out there, which is, by the way, fragmented and not yet covering all the aspects, it is not ready, it's not mature to be transported into regulatory purposes. So our capacity to include microbiome and to make endpoints and see how it impacts AOPs and so on and so forth is small. And omics is a little different business, but also not the idea that we can all use the omics for everything in risk assessment. We are not there. And this gap brings me to the last point, which is the research funding. This should be a priority of everyone, and there is the natural tendency to, if I can use the expression, milk Horizon Europe. But let's remember that last year there were 123 billion euros of research funding in Europe. Horizon Europe is only 20 billions of those. The other 102 billions of research funding are in the national capitals. So if this gap is an issue for Finnish farmers or for Belgium or for French or for Italian governments, this should be a priority at those levels. And to that I add, on top of those 122, there's another 80 billion of private research funding that can and should also be mastered here. But just really to bring the idea that these gaps need to be closed. Otherwise, all those beautiful solutions, some of which I know dear to close to the heart of Indra, we simply don't know how to use them. And when I say we, I don't mean the EU, because I can bring here my Canadian colleague, my USDA colleague, my Japanese colleague, my Australian colleague, and they are all as lost as we are in this. So just to highlight that.
Thank you. Any response to that? Or
no, it was just
fully agree. Fully agree.
Solved.
Thank you. The gentleman over there, please. In the white shirt and the magnificent beard. Please.
It's okay.
Silvio Knabe from Eurofins AgroScience Services. I do have a question which is also in context what we heard before. Before we had the discussion that efficacy of the agro-system is very important because that's why farmers do certain things. And now we talk about the scientific discussion and you say pesticides are not available or available because of a political decision. I mean, in the end, it's a political decision. The question for me is, would it make sense to, like in the US, they have also incorporated the assessment of an economical impact of if a pesticide is stopped. This is not done in Europe at the moment. Do you think is that something which also should be included in the risk assessment? Because I think it's a question which is of course valid at least for the farmer and for the food production. Thank you.
I will react first, and then Max is going to complete that. In fact, there are three ways to approach the question you raised, and it's a very relevant question. You have either to say, okay, I have a product, I remove it, what is the impact? And in that case, you take the farmers for very poor people, because if they have something they do not have, they will adapt. But it's one way of approaching that. A second approach is the cost of inaction. So you said we don't do anything, not for the farmers, but for the overall EU. And we are going to lose chemicals one after the other because of resistance mechanism. Third thing, we must also document, and this is nearly never done anywhere, the hidden cost of our practices. The hidden cost, this have been approached in a report by FAO in 2023, very challenged, but at least they have given the large figures. And it's the hidden cost, which is not a theoretical cost. It's a cost that is paid somewhere, but somewhere else. And means that companies are making business on that, is 2.5 times more than the overall agricultural product. So if you reduce that, I would love to reduce the hidden cost and to give more money to the farmers. And I think this means that we have degrees of freedom. And the third point approach is, what is the overall services that is provided with alternative sustainable crop protection? This is where we have to go. And this is justifying what you said. We have to close the gap in order to go there quickly. So your point is really good. We need economic side on that. We could go a bit further with the social issues of that, but not simply saying with or without. We must have something that is much more global than that. But it's a very good point.
Yeah, I think we have been asking for this kind of an impact assessment already a long time to see that we would know what kind of an impact it will have, not only on the EU level, but down to member state level, down to the sectorial level, where really the impact is hard. And I think that this type of impact assessment would be very much needed, for sure. Time consuming, and for sure it also means that there is a certain type of a cost involved doing it. But I think that we would be better off to really understand what we are doing and what happens once you are either phasing out or bringing in or shifting from more conventional, then slowly into biocontrol, etc., how they will work and all of these. I think we would need this kind of information, not only we as farmers, but I think it's the whole society, the politicians to begin with.
May I quickly? No, I think this is a good question because this topic comes back again and again, but already quite a few scientific publications show that the global cost of using synthetic pesticides just on health, not even on biodiversity, it goes beyond the benefits for society. So it's not just for one substance, it's globally. So it's not a question anymore from a scientific point of view.
Okay, Carlos, with a clarification, no?
Yeah, I need a clarification.
Yeah, please.
I think it was just important here also just to add to this clarification on, we have a division of tasks here, which is because you were even looking at me now, just to make sure that we have a division in tasks in the system we have in Europe between the risk assessor and the risk manager. And the social and economical impacts are indeed a task that is allocated to the risk managers, and both the Commission and for that matter the European Parliament can and have at times, as they find fit, ask for these studies and do these social and economical impacts. Might be more difficult than the true costs of food, like you mentioned for FAO, but this is done, has been done, can be done, but it's really on the political and on the managerial level. Just also to clarify, the reason that it's not part of any of our risk assessments is that it's not our business per definition. Just to clarify that. Thank you.
Lorraine, please.
So, Lorraine Maltby, University of Sheffield. So first of all, thank you to the panel for their very interesting and wide-ranging comments. I'd like to kind of bring you down to focus a little bit. I'd like to give you all a magic wand. And with this magic wand, you can make one change. So given the topic of this colloquium, which is assessing indirect effects of pesticides in risk assessment, with your magic wand, what is the one change you would make?
Okay, please.
I'll start the simple thing. I think today what would be needed and what I would do is to make sure that we would have a bring in first before we phase out any active substance here or products on the market. First bring in, then phase out, with a time for us farmers to learn how to use and how they fit in to our crop rotation.
Okay. I agree with Max. I mean, speeding up the development of biocontrol and other such nature-based solutions, more knowledge on preventative measures. The potential is really huge, but we need to get them on the market and we need more development. And as Max was saying, training farmers in how to use them properly in a good integrated pest management scheme is really important. And then we won't need anymore to do what we're talking about indirect effects of pesticides.
Thank you. Christian? Right.
I think my magic wand would be paying farmers to actually integrate biodiversity as a solution, so that it's not a barrier for them doing it. It's not for everything and anything, but I think when I talk to my uncles who are farmers, they just say, well, where's the money coming from to do what we think is the right thing to do? So I think, yeah, pay them to do the right thing.
I'm not a magician at all. But if I had one, and I would try to have the downstream sector being part of the game. It's over. There is too much pressure on the farmers only, just to say whether they're responsible for everything. If they are doing the job in the context and the pressure, but if you are reducing the pressure or even having pushes coming from the downstream sector down to the consumer, then the system is changing. Just to give you an indication for the consumer, in France there is a company, a cooperative that is trying to push adaptation to climate change and to future context, mainly in grain crops. They are asking for 125 euro more per hectare. This for a cereal is 0.5 cent of euro per bread. Nothing. So why is it not done yet? It's simply because we say the farmers have to do the job.
Thank you. Anybody else who wants to wield the magic wand?
I don't have it. Well, I don't have one magic because I built all my intervention on quite non-magic things. So yeah, I kept my feet really on the ground. I don't have it.
So if I had a magic wand for this risk assessment, I would like to use it to have a very open discussion on which ecosystem services we would like to have where. That's something that is realistic. And also to come back to the point of Jens, how can we better harness the power of these ecosystem services for agriculture, for different types of cropping systems. So I really believe that we can have a very good agriculture if we have a choice of tools and if we have a choice of farming systems, because everything depends on your local conditions. So the less tools and the less options, the less successful will be. And I think with ecosystem services here, we have a good way to have an open discussion about this and really try to harness it to move how we do agriculture in the future.
Thank you.
Can I add something? I didn't get it now.
Come back.
I didn't get it. No, it just inspired me in the sense that perhaps a bit deviating from what you said. So maybe a will would be to really use the ecosystem service system, let's say, to proceed. But anyway, to keep in mind the biodiversity intrinsic value. So if there is a way, that's magic, probably. So that's mine.
Thank you. Well, if I had the magic wand, what I would love to do would be to stop time, because the issues that we're facing are very pressing, very urgent. The complexity of the task is huge, as I think you've got a flavour for today. And for us to be able to react in time to this issue, I really think we need to stop time. We need to stop the clock to give us the time and, dare I say, resources to be able to address this before it's too late. So that will be my use of the magic wand. Speaking of time, it's up. We're done. Thank you very much to our panelists for your open contributions, sharing your thoughts with us, and responding as best you can to the questions from the audience. So please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you to you, the audience, for your questions. It always helps to animate these sessions. I know there's more in the audience, but you can profit from hassling our panelists over lunch. And with that, I hand you on to Katarina from NetPlus. I was going to say from Netflix, but it's not, is it? It's from NetPlus.
Sorry, I'm just going to be over here because it's already very crowded on stage. But I actually have the honor of telling you a little bit more what's happening after lunch. And because we're going to go straight into group discussions after lunch, this is my one opportunity to have you all in the same room. So that's why we're just going to do a few minutes before you're then released in your very well-deserved lunch break. So if I could just have the next slide to give you a bit of an idea of what we're going to do later after lunch, so in just a bit more than an hour. We have a couple of points we want to address this afternoon. And in this afternoon, it is really about exchanging. So there are going to be group discussions. You're going to have the opportunity to work in smaller groups, to really talk to each other, to exchange on some key themes that the EFSA team has identified, to discuss, of course, in relation to indirect effects in ERA. And it is going down to really wanting to identify practical solutions, some regulatory ideas, some research needs. So to really continue, of course, on the great discussions, presentations, panel debates of this morning and dive deeper into these ideas. We want to have you discuss. We want a real dialogue in those groups. Ideally, of course, also with a mix of stakeholders from different perspectives, similar to what you had up here, which was a very diverse set of views and points. And I think we want to continue that also after lunch. And then, of course, also to see if there are some better options of alignment that we can identify across different frameworks, and also see where are the possible links and synergies to have there. How do we do this? We're going to have 4 topics that you can see up on the slide. So on the one hand, we're looking into integrating indirect effects in the risk assessment. We're looking into mitigating risks of these indirect effects, exploring regulatory and research and innovation needs, and of course also, as I said, exploring the synergies amongst the different frameworks. So these are the 4 topics in 4 different groups this afternoon. You can see we have about 2.5 hours for these discussions, and we do these in 4 groups, so 1 topic per group, and we're going to have in each group, of course, also a way to discuss these questions. So you have moderators, facilitators in the group that will help you, guide you through that process in self-moderated groups. So you'll get instructions on how to tackle the different questions as a group, how to answer them, how to discuss, and how to also, of course, report back in the end. So there will be discussion rounds, there will be key questions for you to address. We're going to have 2 rounds of these discussions, and you will also have an opportunity to see within your topic what other people have been working on. So there's something that we call a little rotation, not a crop rotation, more like a people rotation, but still we're going to have that as part of the discussions, because of course we understand that if you break a group into smaller groups, you're always eager to hear what the others have done and what they discussed. So we build that in to the program as well. And last but not least, after the group discussion, we're actually going to also have an opportunity, and we have that also on the next slide, to have a look into the other 3 groups that you unfortunately not will be able to join. So you will be in one group, and there are, of course, 3 other topics that are being discussed in other groups, but you get the opportunity to visit these rooms, these groups, to hear what they have produced, and also, of course, to put in thoughts on your own on what you see, right? Because this is your opportunity then to really see also the other 3 topics that you didn't get 2.5 hours to spend on. So we really encourage you also to do this. We called it networking and exchange because you will have the opportunity to have a coffee in your hand while you do that. So it's a relaxed atmosphere to visit the other rooms, but please do take the opportunity to visit the other rooms and the other groups, because that's your opportunity to contribute to those topics as well. There are different ways how you can do this. So you can talk to the hosts that are remaining in the rooms. You can also leave comments on post-its, and you can of course also fill in a little digital tool if you want to do that, if you prefer to do that. Now, if we go just into the suspense now, which groups there are, on the next slide, we actually have them listed. And now, if you would mind looking at your badge, there is a little colored dot. If you don't see it, maybe you have to turn around the badge because it's on the other side. But it has a color. So it's either green, blue, yellowish, or pinkish, and that should give you an indication in which group you are. We understand, of course, that you might actually want to be in all of the groups, but of course, building also on your expertise and your background, there was a choice made for you in which group you would probably contribute a lot. So the green group in integration is actually going to be one floor up. So you actually have to just go up the stairs and you are in a beautiful room with a lot of glass upstairs. And then we have the other 3 rooms actually just on this floor on the other side of the hallway. So we have the pink one all the way in the back over there. Then there's the yellow one just across the road, I want to say, just across the hallway. And then the green one is very close to the lunch coffee area. Sorry, no, the blue one. You find all the way over there. But there are also signs on the doors, so you cannot get lost. There are a lot of people that can guide you, that are hosts that can help you along the way. So please also, of course, make use of that. Quick check.
So, dear colleagues, welcome back to the last part of our colloquium today. I will attempt to give you a brief roundup of the discussions that was held in the breakout groups, and maybe a few reflections on the day as well. So if I could have the next slide, please. Or is it up to me? Oh my God. Oops. Okay. So, briefly, in case you didn't have time to get around all the groups yourselves, I'll give you the 3 main points that came out of the discussions, the 3 concluding remarks, if you like, from the work that took place in the discussion groups. To remind you, the 4 groups that we had was firstly on integrating indirect effects in environmental risk assessment, the second one on the mitigation of the risks of indirect effects, and thirdly, exploring regulatory and R&I needs, and the final one, exploring synergies amongst regulatory frameworks. And then the next slide, I keep asking myself, next slide, here we go. It's been a long day. So, Group 1, integrating indirect effects in environmental risk assessment. So, the first conclusion is that it's felt that a limited number of indirect effects can actually be addressed by assessing the direct effects on non-target organisms at the lower trophic levels. So, in view of trying to keep things as simple and as practical as possible, we can make that first step quite easily, we feel. So secondly, again, to keep our answers, particularly the tools and methods used for risk assessment, as simple as possible. So only making them complex when complexity gives us added value to the risk assessment. And for sure, the processes and the tools that we develop need to be transparent. People need to understand how we've done the assessment and how we've come to the conclusions. I would say a fundamental principle of how EFSA works, but I think it's very good that you remind us that that also is what you want. So, yep, I think we take that one absolutely to heart. And then thirdly, complex research plus innovation is needed to adequately address all indirect effects and to produce simple guidance. And here, I think the sentiment behind this is we do what we can as soon as we can, but we note that what we can do relatively rapidly is going to be a little bit limited in scope. And as time goes on, we will be adding more complexity and more sophistication to the risk assessments on indirect effects that we do. So those, if I've understood correctly, were the 3 main outcomes of the first group. I silently told myself, go to the next slide. So mitigating risks of indirect effects. So here the main outcomes, firstly, how to quantify risk mitigation measures in the risk assessment scheme, some major challenge that's seen in front of us. And again, I think across all of EFSA's areas, where we can go to do quantitative risk assessment, we try to go there because it's more informative. So that's seen as a first challenge. And secondly, and I think a discussion that was probably held across all of the groups, is the need for clarity on protection goals. What is it that we're trying to protect? What is the baseline that we want to refer to? And when we're talking about what is it that we want to protect, it's what and where and when, all those questions in there. We need to have, as a community of stakeholders involved in environmental risk assessment, I think clarity and agreement amongst ourselves about what it is that we're actually addressing and particularly what it is that we're protecting. As a risk assessor, of course, I would say that this is principally the work of the risk manager. They are the ones who define this. But in order for them to do that, they need very significant scientific input. So again, it comes back to us as the risk assessor to assist the risk manager in helping them to set clear protection goals. And then the final one, importance of integrated pest management and precision application techniques. So being able to take integrated pest management into account in our risk assessments. As IPM becomes more sophisticated, as precision application techniques and in fact other aspects of precision agriculture become more widely used, in order for our risk assessments to be relevant, we need to be able to take these into account. And I think on a larger scale, what this means is we need more interaction with primary producers, with farmers, to understand how farming actually takes place. And we also need closer relationship with the research community to understand what will be the new ways in which farming will be carried out in the future, to ensure that our risk assessments have a reasonable lifetime. You know, we simply do not have the resources to be updating them every couple of years because of developments in agriculture. We can't do that, simply. So we have to have some vision of what's coming to us in the future. Third, oh, it's me again. The third group, exploring regulatory and RNI needs. So to define and conceptualize and make indirect effects operational. So again, to understand in detail what do we mean by indirect effects. And it comes back also to when we're making them operational, to be including them into setting of specific protection goals, to understand how they link to maybe baseline of biodiversity in particular that we want to protect as well. Then a need for integrated methods approach. So to integrate, and again, I think a discussion that was held across all four groups, when we talk about integration, we're talking about this in many different dimensions. So firstly, obviously, I would say integration across different legislative areas. If we want to protect stuff, we want to make sure that it's protected equally by all those different areas that could impinge upon biodiversity, for example. So that would mean some higher level coordination, I think one would expect, of ensuring that we have, if you like, that equal protection in the different legislative areas. It also means ensuring that we have a good match-up between not only what happens in the fields, but how we assess that, the type of data that we ask for, enable for us to carry out that assessment, the tools that we develop that are reliant upon that data, that has to match up. Otherwise, we can't do anything with the tools because there's no data. And people get pissed off producing data that's not used in tools. And it has to link with what what farmers can actually do in the fields. If we don't have that, then this is all fantasy, you know, so we have to make sure that's there. And it has to fit into a legislative context. So it has to be something that can be legislated for to make it sure it happens, and can be monitored for to make sure that it has happened and has had the anticipated effect. And very much as we heard this morning, moving towards a system-based approach, using models as the way forward, applicable across regulation and across regulations, I think, is also the intended meaning here. The system-based approach, I think, is maybe seen as the golden goose, the golden grail, the thing that we would love to aim for. Whilst I heard quite a lot of realism, I think, today, in that this, I think everybody recognises, is going to be very difficult to achieve and not something that we can grab hold of immediately. And we're going to have to find the small steps that will take us towards that objective. And the last group. So, an integrated vision on biodiversity. Conservation, I reckon, rather than conversation, but and restoration, harmonised protection goals, again across all legislative areas. So if we're going to protect stuff, let's make sure that we protect it equally from everything. Otherwise, we could be wasting our time. Makes perfect sense. For implementation, a balanced but not too complex governance system. So this comes back to what some of the other groups were saying, is integrating methods, data sharing, also financing, communication about what is being done and how it is protecting. Very happy, in fact, to see the communication aspect coming in, because if people don't understand or even realise what is being done, then it's difficult to persuade people that it's a good idea, because there will be cost. There will be cost somewhere and to somebody, for sure, in this. Again, in terms of balance and complexity, I think there's a very good and shared realization that we have to keep things as simple as possible because they're very complex. So we have to keep the complexity, and complexity translates as cost and time. We have to keep both those aspects to a minimum to ensure that we can implement things and implement them in a timely way. And this has to be integrated in our thinking right from the start on the systems that we're developing. You know, we could go for developing something super complicated and at some undefined point in the future try to slim that down to something more practical. If we can speed up that step by already having this simplicity idea in our heads, I think it'll get us to where we need to be much faster. And then the final one, tracking, again, something we hear, I think, in all of the groups, the need that there will be for monitoring of the impact of whatever we put into place. We need to be reassured that it has delivered what we hope it would deliver, and to learn from that, because for sure it won't, not 100%. And then we need systems be able to take those learnings on board to continue improving whatever, particularly risk assessment, talking about it from an EFSA point of view, whatever risk assessment systems and tools we put in place. Reporting, of course, very important to tell European citizens what we're up to and whether it's working and how we are protecting the environment. Again, it all comes with cost. All comes with cost. So the European citizen has a right to know. And so reporting, one way of doing that, and verification, of course, part of the system. So those were the outcomes of your discussion or review. Very useful for us in our process. So, as I hope you've understood, we are developing guidance to tackle the aspects of the impacts on non-target organisms, but also wider reflection on how to assess impact on biodiversity. These reflections will be gathered together into an event report, as we usually do for our colloquia. I believe we have a rather optimistic publication schedule on this. I think I would like to say it will be published before the end of the summer. Some people, I think, want to shoot me now, but anyway, as soon as is practical, we will be publishing the outcome of this colloquium, and there you'll be able to find your inputs into this. The reflections of today are, from our point of view, principally to help feed the discussions that will be taking place in the working group that will be addressing the mandates that we have from the Commission. And we have quite a few members of the working group present here, and they have been witnessing the discussions, and so firsthand they'll be able to take that information into those discussions. So the working group, in fact, meets tomorrow. So we have immediate live take-up of all of your input from today. And I think that's very important to get hold of it when it's fresh. So that's those are the immediate steps. That's what we'll be doing with the outcome of this colloquium. And that's more than enough for me, I think. It just remains for me to thank you all for turning up today, firstly, and for participating so actively and with passion and expertise and interest. All of those things are what we need and want and hope for to make an event like this a success. As a consequence of that, we are very happy to offer you a drink, where there will be a short aperitivo. I'm sorry it's only short, but there will be drinks available in the usual area just outside here up till 6 o'clock this evening. So please, I'm sure you're all thirsty, so we hope to see you all there. In particular, in addition to your contributions from today, I would particularly like to thank our speakers and our panelists from this morning for their contributions to set this up. So please join me in a round of applause for our speakers. My particular thanks to our contractor, NetPlus, for their extremely professional assistance in helping us to organise and operate this event. I think it's one of the rare events that I've been to where there haven't been any technical hitches. So well done for that, much appreciated. And also to EFSA's staff, who have been very engaged in this whole process. As I'm sure you can imagine, this isn't organised overnight, so there's been quite some contribution from quite some staff over a period of time, as well as their presence here today. So my heartfelt thanks to all of EFSA's staff from all of the different units and departments that have been involved in this as well. So to you, thank you. And we're done, finished. Let's go have a drink. Thank you.